Greetings, everyone. This is LUMOUS What If. Prepare yourselves for What If Tonks visited Privet Drive at age 5 and used House of Black ancient magic to legally claim Harry forever. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The girl who claimed the morning Nymphadora Tonks changed everything. She was wearing mismatched socks, one purple, one green, and had accidentally turned her hair the color of a traffic cone somewhere between the car and the curb. She hadn't meant to. She'd been staring out the window at the perfectly identical houses sliding past, and something about their sameness had made her feel itchy all over, the way she always felt when things were too orderly, too scrubbed clean, too insistent that everything was fine, thank you very much. And when Nymphadora felt itchy, her magic did things without asking permission first. Her mother noticed immediately. Andromeda Tonks glanced sideways from the driver's seat, took in the blazing orange hair, and said nothing. She'd learned over 5 years of raising her daughter that commenting on the hair only made it more dramatic. Stay close to me, Andromeda said instead, pulling the car to a stop in front of number 4 Privet Drive. And don't touch anything. I know, Tonks said, already unbuckling herself with the focused determination of someone dismantling a puzzle. Dora, I know, Mom. Andromeda looked at her daughter for a moment, the traffic cone hair, the mismatched socks, the gap-toothed grin she hadn't quite deployed yet but was clearly warming up, and felt the familiar complicated mixture of love and exhaustion and something fiercer underneath both. She got out of the car. Number 4 was precisely what Andromeda had expected. That was in itself the most damning thing about it. The garden was immaculate. The windows were clean. The car in the drive was large and very shiny. Someone had placed a ceramic duck near the front step with the specific energy of a person who wanted their neighbors to know they had taste. Everything about the house announced that the people inside it were normal and respectable and perfectly fine. Andromeda had grown up in the House of Black. She knew exactly what that kind of performance cost and exactly what it was hiding. She'd come because of a letter, not an official one, not ministry correspondence with its self-important seals and parchment that smelled of bureaucratic indifference. It had been a note handwritten, slipped under her door 2 weeks ago. She still didn't know who'd sent it. The handwriting was cramped and urgent, and it had said only, "The Potter boy is at number 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. Someone should check on him. Please." Dumbledore had placed Harry with his aunt. That was the official story, the one murmured through the wizarding world with the soft reverence people reserved for Dumbledore's decisions, necessary, protective, the blood wards, you understand. Andromeda understood blood wards perfectly well. She also understood that blood wards kept dark wizards out. They said nothing about what they kept in. She rang the doorbell. Tonks stood slightly behind her mother's left knee and stared at the ceramic duck with the flat, evaluative gaze of a child who has decided it is personally offensive. The door opened. The woman who answered it was large in a way that seemed to be mostly composed of self-importance. Broad shoulders held very straight, a long neck that seemed permanently craned in the direction of whatever she was judging, hair permed into an aggressive helmet of respectability. She looked at Andromeda and then at Tonks, and the thin-lipped smile she'd been preparing evaporated. "Yes," said Petunia Dursley. "Good morning," Andromeda said pleasantly. "My name is Andromeda Tonks. I'm here to look in on Harry Potter. I believe he's staying with you." Something happened in Petunia Dursley's face. It was quick, a flicker of something behind the eyes there and gone, and then the smile came back, thinner and more effortful than before. "He's perfectly fine," Petunia said. "He's well looked after. I'm sure he is," Andromeda said in the tone of someone who was not sure at all. "I'd like to see him, please." "I don't know who you are," Petunia said, her voice sharpening. "I don't know how you got this address. This is a private. We're neighbors of the Weasleys," Andromeda said, which was technically true in the way that any 2 points in England were technically proximate to something. "Old family friends, I promised." Lily-eyed, the name did something. Petunia went very still, very briefly, the way things go still before they go brittle. "Come in," she said. The inside of number 4 was as immaculate as the outside, which meant it looked like a house that was worked very hard to appear unlived in. The sitting room had pristine cream carpet and photographs on the mantel, a large pink baby at various stages of development, a large pink man at various stages of smug satisfaction, and Petunia herself, smiling in the specific way that people smile when they want the photograph to prove something. There were no photographs of anyone else. Tonks noticed this immediately. She stood in the sitting room doorway and catalogued the photographs with her wide brown eyes and said nothing, which was unusual enough that Andromeda glanced down at her. "Where is he?" Andromeda asked. "I'll get him," Petunia said too quickly. He's doing chores. He has chores on Saturday mornings. It's good for children to have." "He's 5, Andromeda said. The silence that followed was very loud. "He's in the kitchen," Petunia said, her voice gone flat and stripped of its earlier performance. She led them through. The kitchen was also immaculate in the way of places that have been cleaned by someone else and are very much intended to stay that way. There was a boy standing at the sink. He was washing dishes. He was small, very small, small enough that he was standing on a stool to reach the sink, and he was wearing clothes that had clearly been made for someone 2 or 3 sizes larger than him. A faded blue jumper, trousers with the waist rolled over twice. He had dark hair that went in every direction at once and glasses that were held together at one hinge with a piece of tape. He didn't turn around when they came in. He kept washing dishes, hands moving with the careful, practiced thoroughness of someone who had learned that a missed spot had consequences. "Harry," Petunia said, her voice had changed registers, still tight but differently tight, the way voices get when they're performing for someone. "Someone's come to see you." He turned around then. Tonks had seen pictures of James Potter. Not many, but she'd seen them. Andromeda had a few from the old days, from before everything went wrong, from the brief bright period when being connected to the House of Black had meant something other than shame and silence. James Potter had been all easy grin and wild hair, and the kind of confident warmth that made him the center of any room. Harry looked like James the way a photograph looks like the person it depicts, the same features, the same dark hair, but somehow all the life had been drained out of it and left the shape behind. His eyes were Lily's startling green behind the taped glasses, unusual and vivid, and they moved between Andromeda and Tonks with an expression that wasn't hope exactly, because 5 years in this house had done something to hope. But it was the memory of hope, maybe. At least hope had been, which still remembered its shape. "Hello," he said. His voice was small, not the small of shy, the small of someone who had learned that smaller was safer. Tonks moved before Andromeda could. She crossed the kitchen in 4 steps, stepped up onto the edge of the stool beside Harry so they were eye level with each other, and studied him with the direct, uncomplicated attention of a child who has not yet learned that staring is rude. He stared back. "Your glasses are broken," Tonks said. "I know. How'd you break them?" A pause, brief, but Andromeda caught it. "I fell," Harry said. Tonks looked at him for another long moment, then she reached out and pulled up the sleeve of his oversized jumper. There was a bruise on his forearm, faded yellow-green at the edges, but there. "You fell on your arm," Tonks said, not accusatory, just a question, a real one. Andromeda looked at Petunia. Petunia was looking at the window, her jaw set, her hands folded in front of her with the rigid precision of someone trying very hard not to be present in their own body. "Sometimes," Harry said carefully, "when I fall on my arm." Tonks dropped the sleeve. She reached into her pocket. She had deep pockets. She'd insisted on deep pockets in every pair of trousers since she was 3, and produced a slightly squashed chocolate frog, still mostly intact in its card and wrapper. She held it out to Harry. He looked at it for a moment with an expression so complicated it was almost painful to watch. Then he took it, not quickly, not grabbing, carefully, gently, like he expected it to be taken back. "I'm Tonks," Tonks said. "You don't have to call me Nymphadora." "Okay," Harry said. "What's your name?" He blinked. Harry," she repeated, trying it out. "Do you want to come sit outside?" He glanced at Petunia. The glance was reflex, automatic, barely conscious, and it told Andromeda everything she needed to know about every second of the last 4 years. "He has chores," Petunia began. "He can do them later," Andromeda said, and her voice had gone quiet in a way that was significantly more dangerous than loud. She looked at Petunia, and for the first time Petunia looked back, and whatever she saw in Andromeda's face made her stop talking. "Okay," Harry said, and this time he didn't look at Petunia at all. They went into the back garden. It was as groomed as the front, all clipped edges and strategic shrubs, with a large plastic climbing frame near the back that had clearly been bought for someone else's child entirely. Tonks assessed it, found it acceptable, and climbed to the top with the fearless efficiency of a spider monkey. "Come up," she said, already sitting on the platform at the top, looking down at Harry with her traffic cone hair blazing in the morning sun. Harry looked at the climbing frame, then he climbed it. He was careful, testing each rung, but he got to the top and sat beside Tonks and looked out over the fence at the other identical back gardens. "Is your mum magic?" Harry asked. "Yeah," Tonks said. "Are you?" Harry went still. "It's okay," Tonks said. "I am too. Watch." And she screwed up her face with the effort of concentration. She was still working on doing it on purpose, doing it with intention rather than just feeling. It had been a whole thing between her and her mum, and changed her hair. Green, bright, leaf bright, ridiculous green. Harry stared at her, his mouth had opened slightly. "It just does it," Tonks said, touching her own hair with something between pride and exasperation. "I can't always make it do what I want, but I'm getting better." "I can do things too," Harry said slowly, as if he was confessing something. "I make things happen when things happen, I make things happen back." "That's magic," Tonks said simply. "Aunt Petunia says it's wrong." Tonks turned to look at him fully, and her green hair shifted, not quite to another color, but deepening, going darker the way the sky goes before a storm. "My Auntie Bellatrix says magic is only for people like her," she said. "She's in prison now." Harry blinked. "Your auntie is in prison?" "Yeah," Tonks picked at a splinter on the platform edge with focused disinterest. "She did really bad things. My mum doesn't talk to most of our family. Our family was mostly pretty awful." She looked at Harry sideways. "Are your other family awful?" Harry thought about this with the kind of earnest, careful consideration that 5-year-olds bring to important questions. "Yes," he said, "but I think maybe it's my fault. Because if it was their fault, they'd say sorry." The clarity of this, the heartbreaking, direct, completely logical nature of what a child does when adults fail them, the way he had taken the world's cruelty and turned it inward into something he could manage, hit Andromeda like cold water. She was standing near the garden door, far enough away to give them space, close enough to hear, and she pressed her hand flat against the brick of the house because she needed something solid beneath her palm. Tonks went quiet for a moment, then she said, "No, that's wrong. What? If it was your fault, they'd get angrier when you were good, but if it was their fault, they'd get angrier when you were good, so it doesn't work like that." She frowned at the fence. "My mum says bad people always make it the other person's fault, so you can't use that to figure it out." Harry said nothing, but he unwrapped the chocolate frog slowly, broke it in half, and held one half out to Tonks. She took it. They ate in silence for a moment, and in that silence something happened, something that Andromeda witnessed but couldn't entirely explain, not then. Her daughter, who was noise and color and constant forward motion, went still, not the false stillness of boredom. The real stillness, the kind that happened when Tonks felt something deeply. The morning light was doing something in the garden. That was the first sign, a shimmer, faint enough that it might have been heat haze, but the morning wasn't warm enough for heat haze. It was June, yes, but this was England, and the sky was overcast in the way English skies commit to being overcast. The shimmer was coming from Tonks. Andromeda straightened, her hand came off the wall. She moved toward the climbing frame, not running, but quick, her heels making no sound on the grass the way she'd been trained not to make sound years and years of being a black, learning how to move through spaces quietly. Dora, she said softly. Tonks didn't look at her. She was looking at Harry, and her eyes had gone dark. Not black, not quite, but deep, the warm brown gone somewhere else and something older sitting in its place. It happened sometimes with children of old families who hadn't come into their full magic yet. The ancestral magic would surface, recognizing something, reaching for something. Andromeda had read about this. Every black family witch and wizard had read about this because it was in the grimoires, the great leather-bound books that smelled of centuries and blood, the Rite of Kin-Claiming. One of the oldest workings in the House of Black's arsenal, older than the family motto, older than the tapestry, older than almost anything else. You couldn't perform it deliberately. It had to arise from genuine recognition, genuine connection, genuine need. The magic had to decide. Mum, Tonks said, and her voice was strange, still her voice, still entirely her daughter's voice, but with an echo behind it. He doesn't have anyone. I know, Andromeda said, that's not right. It wasn't a statement of opinion, it was something firmer, an assessment, a verdict, the kind of thing that closes an argument. No, Andromeda agreed, it isn't. He should have someone. Tonks turned to look at Harry, and Harry was watching her with his wide green eyes completely steady, not frightened, which was remarkable. Most children, faced with eyes gone deep and strange and a shimmer in the air around a person, would have scrambled backwards. Harry sat perfectly still, as if he'd been waiting for this, as if some part of him had always known something was coming. You should have someone, Tonks said to him directly, with the complete earnestness of a child making a real promise. I'll be your someone. Dora, Andromeda said, her voice urgent now because she knew what was coming and she needed her daughter to understand what she was doing. Listen to me, if you do this, it can't be undone. I know, Tonks said, and she sounded completely 5 years old and completely ancient at the same time. That's why it has to be me. The shimmer erupted. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't gradual. The magic of the House of Black came up through Tonks the way underground water breaks surface, not slowly seeping but bursting, pressurized, ancient, carrying everything the aquifer had collected over centuries of depth. It was silver-black, the color of the sky at the absolute threshold between night and day, and it rang. Not a sound exactly, but a ringing, a resonance that Andromeda felt in her teeth and her sternum and somewhere behind her eyes. It hit Harry not like a blow. Like recognition, like the moment you hear a word in a language you've never spoken but somehow know. The green eyes went wide and the taped glasses fogged slightly, and then something answering rose up in him, not black magic. No, this was something else, Lily's magic maybe, or James's, or both, or something entirely Harry's own, and the two magics met in the air between them and the shimmer went blinding white. Andromeda threw up a shield, more reflex than decision, and through it she watched the light resolve into a shape. A contract. Ancient families had their bindings written in light. She'd seen this in the grimoires too, always thought it was metaphorical, an illustration, a poetic rendering of something that was really just legal and arcane and dry. But it was real. It wrote itself in the space between her daughter and Harry Potter. Flowing black script, the words of the rite, describing rights and responsibilities and bonds and protections in language that predated the current ministry by roughly 600 years. It burned for 30 seconds, then it went out. Tonks sat on the climbing frame looking slightly dazed, her hair cycling through 3 colors in quick succession before settling on white blonde. Harry sat beside her. He was staring at his hands, which had a faint luminescence to them like held torchlight fading slowly. Oh, Tonks said, and she sounded like herself again, completely herself, 5 years old and slightly tired. That felt weird. Yeah, Harry said, then slowly he looked up at Andromeda. What was that? Andromeda let out the breath she'd been holding. It came out shakier than she'd intended. She looked at the 2 children on the climbing frame, her daughter with her cycling hair and gap-toothed grin returning, and this boy who was already sitting straighter than he'd been 10 minutes ago, as if something had unknotted in his spine, and she tried to figure out where to begin. That, she said carefully, was very old magic from our family. She looked at Tonks. Do you understand what you just did? I claimed him, Tonks said with total certainty. Like the book said. The black book, the big one with the silver clasp. She paused. I wasn't supposed to read that one. No, Andromeda said, you weren't, but I did. Yes, you did, and now I understand what it means. Andromeda looked at her daughter for a long moment. 5 years old, reading grimoires she had absolutely no business reading, triggered a Kin-Claiming on a pure instinct of recognition and love, sat on a climbing frame in Surrey with chocolate frog on her chin and hair the color of snow. And she was right, the magic had agreed with her, the magic had decided. Yes, Andromeda said, you do. What does it mean? Harry asked. Tonks turned to him with the air of someone about to deliver important information. It means, she said, that magically I'm your guardian like a big sister, except legal. The House of Black is responsible for you now, which means my mum will sort everything out. She looked at Andromeda. You'll sort everything out, won't you? I will, Andromeda said, and she was surprised by how absolutely she meant it. Something had settled in her own chest, not the ancestral magic that wasn't hers to feel, but something adjacent to it. A decision made in the moment she watched her daughter look at a bruised, hollow boy and say that's not right, with the certainty of someone who has never been taught to be small. I'll sort everything out. She went back inside. Petunia was in the kitchen, standing where they'd left her, which told Andromeda something about the nature of guilt. She looked up when Andromeda came in, and she did something unexpected. She straightened, lifted her chin, set her expression into something defensive and cornered and ready to fight. Credit where it was due, Andromeda thought. She was going to argue. Whatever you think you saw, Petunia began. Sit down, Andromeda said. This is my house. Sit down. Petunia sat. She did it the way you sit when you don't want to sit, but something in the other person's voice has bypassed your will entirely, and she landed in the kitchen chair with a rigidity that suggested she was not done arguing. She had merely been temporarily paused. Andromeda sat across from her. She folded her hands on the kitchen table. She looked at Petunia Dursley, this woman who was Lily's sister, who had once been a little girl in a house in Cokeworth watching her sister do magic with wide eyes, who had grown up to become something hard and closed and afraid, and she tried to find the right words. I'm not here to punish you, she said, which was the truth. I'm not here to report you to anyone or take anything from you that you value. I don't particularly care about your house, your car, your husband, or your son. They're not my concern. Petunia said nothing. Her jaw was tight. Harry is my concern, Andromeda said. He became my concern about 2 minutes ago in a way that is now magically and legally binding under laws that predate your government, your prime minister, and your entire system of property rights. She kept her voice level. The Rite of Kin-Claiming has been invoked. My daughter is now his guardian under black family law. She is 5 years old, so that guardianship is exercised through me, practically speaking, but the claim is hers and it is permanent. You can't just— Petunia stopped, swallowed. Dumbledore said he has to stay here. The protections are real, Andromeda said. The blood wards are real, I know that. I also know they require only Lily's blood, which runs in your blood, not Harry's requirement to suffer in your kitchen. She looked at Petunia steadily. The wards will hold without him here. Know that too? Petunia's chin dropped, just a fraction. The defensive angle of her neck lost a degree. What do you want? Petunia asked, and her voice had gone flat and tired in a way that sounded like relief, like she'd been waiting for someone to come take this from her hands. I want to take Harry today, Andromeda said. I want you to not fight me on this. I want you to tell me what he needs medically, physically, anything, and I want you to understand that this is better for all of you. Vernon will— I'm not speaking with Vernon, Andromeda said. Vernon has no standing in this matter. He is a muggle, and he has never had standing in matters of magical guardianship. This conversation is between us. Petunia was silent, her hands folded on the table, pressed together until the knuckles went white. Then she said quietly and quickly, as if saying it softly made it smaller, he's had his vaccinations. He eats too little, but he's never been he's never been badly hurt, not badly. A pause. My husband's temper, I understand, Andromeda said, and she kept the heat out of her voice with considerable effort. I didn't want to. I tried to explain to Vernon that he wasn't, but Vernon doesn't. Petunia stopped. The words weren't going anywhere good. She looked out the window at the garden where Harry was now apparently trying to show Tonks how to balance on the top of the climbing frame with both hands up, and she looked at him the way people look at things they've decided are not their problem, and Andromeda saw that this woman was not a monster. She was something in some ways worse. She was a person who had let things happen because it was easier than stopping them. I'll take him today, Andromeda said again, gently this time. You don't have to explain to Vernon, you don't have to do anything. I'll send a letter that explains the magical circumstances. You can show it to Dumbledore if he comes asking. You're legally released from guardianship under magical law, and I'll file the paperwork for Muggle Family Court as well. You won't be responsible for him anymore. Petunia's shoulders dropped. Inch by inch, the rigid performance of respectability deflated, and underneath it was just a tired woman in her own kitchen on a Saturday morning. His mother used to do that, she said. The hair changed color. My daughter is a metamorph magus, Andromeda said. It's rare. Lily's was just the red, Petunia said, not to Andromeda, not really to anyone. But it was always the same red, no matter what, even when she'd been crying. A long pause. He has her eyes. Yes, Andromeda said. He does. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Outside, Tonks had apparently successfully balanced on the climbing frame platform with both hands up and was doing it with her arms spread wide, hair cycling gold, while Harry watched from below and laughed. Andromeda heard the laugh through the kitchen window and felt it in her sternum like a bell struck. It was the first time Harry had laughed in this house. She was almost certain it was the first time in a long while, period. It was small, tentative, just a little testing whether laughter was allowed, but it was there and it was real, and it had taken Tonks approximately 25 minutes to produce it, which told Andromeda everything she needed to know about her daughter. Pack his things, Andromeda said, standing. Whatever he has, I'll be outside. She went back into the garden. The packing took 40 minutes. This was in some ways the most painful part, not the conversation with Petunia, not the magic, but the 40 minutes, because it became very clear very quickly that Harry's things amounted to 3 too-large shirts, 2 pairs of trousers with the elastic worn through, a pair of trainers with one sole peeling, and a single stuffed toy, a rabbit gray with washing, one ear repaired with different colored thread, that he reached under the stairs to retrieve with the careful, furtive motion of someone retrieving something that had been told not to be precious to them. He came out of the cupboard under the stairs holding the rabbit and wearing the same expression he'd had at the sink, careful, provisional, not quite hope. "Ready?" Tonks said. She was already by the car, had established herself against the passenger side door with the certainty of someone who had decided all that remained was logistics. "That's all my stuff," Harry said, with the inflection of someone who knows this is probably not normal and is waiting to find out if it matters. "Okay," Tonks said, which was all she said, and she opened the car door. They got in, Harry in the back with Tonks, who had fallen asleep against his shoulder before they'd reached the end of Privet Drive, her hair gone soft lavender in sleep, her mouth slightly open. Harry sat very straight and still, the stuffed rabbit in his lap, his green eyes watching the identical houses slide past through the window. Andromeda drove. In the rearview mirror, she could see the two of them, her daughter asleep and Harry awake, and she watched him process the fact that the houses were changing, that the streets were widening and then narrowing, that the world was not all identical semis and ceramic ducks, that it went on and was varied and might contain things worth looking at. He noticed her watching in the mirror. He looked at her reflection. "Are you magic too?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Is your house magic?" "In a way." She thought about how to explain the Tonks house to someone who had spent 4 years in number 4. It doesn't look like anything unusual from outside, but things happen in it, good things mostly. Things move when Dora asks them to. The kitchen does what it's asked. "Oh," Harry said. He looked back out the window then. "Is she really going to be my—" She said she was going to be my someone. "Yes," Andromeda said. "That's exactly what she is." Harry was quiet for a moment. Tonks made a small sound in her sleep and her hair went briefly orange before settling back to lavender. "Okay," Harry said, and it was the quietest, most careful, most honest okay Andromeda had ever heard. Like something in him was putting a very small thing down somewhere safe for the first time. She pulled onto the motorway and drove them home. Back at number 4 Privet Drive, the Arab of the immaculate back garden still held a faint shimmer, barely visible, fading, the last light of ancient magic burning itself out. Petunia stood at the kitchen window and watched it go. Her husband would be home from golf at noon. She would tell him that social services had come. She would tell him the boy had been taken. She would tell him the paperwork was in order. Vernon would bluster and then shrug and then pour himself a drink, because at the end of it there had been no boy he particularly wanted. She would not tell him what she'd seen in the garden. She would not tell him about the silver-black light, or the woman with the composed face and the eyes that had seen through every performance, or the girl with the changing hair who had looked at Harry like he was a person. She would not tell him that when the strange little girl had held Harry's sleeve up and looked at the bruise on his arm with that flat, uncomplicated gaze, Petunia had felt something shift in her chest like ice breaking. She would not tell him that she'd cried a little, standing at the window watching the car drive away. Not for Harry exactly, not grief exactly, just something. Something that had been there for a long time, under the performance, underneath the perfunctory, underneath all the ways she'd learned to not look at things. She put the kettle on, she wiped her eyes. She didn't think about her sister's eyes in a smaller face watching the world from the backseat window. She didn't think about it at all. Far up the motorway, Harry Potter ate another chocolate frog. Tonks had produced 3 more from her inexhaustible pockets, and looked at the moving card of Merlin that came with it, and for the first time in a long time felt the particular lightness of something he would not have had a word for yet, but which was being on his way somewhere he was wanted. And at number 12, Grimmauld Place, London, in the records room that no one had touched since the Blacks last held power, a sheet of parchment appeared in the register of the noble and most ancient house of Black. The ink that wrote itself there was silver black and permanent. Harry James Potter, it said, claimed kinbond to Nymphadora Tonks, acknowledged daughter of Andromeda Black Tonks. Secondary guardian, Sirius Orion Black. The secondary guardian line glowed for a moment, then dimmed. In Azkaban, 500 miles north, in a cell above a gray and hammering sea, Sirius Black, who had been staring at the wall for 4 years with the specific blankness of someone fighting not to become hollow, felt something. Not magic, not warmth, nothing as clear or kind as hope. Just a pull like a thread attached somewhere in his chest, suddenly drawn taut. He sat up. He looked at his hands. He didn't know what it was, but something in the long gray nothing of Azkaban had changed. Chapter 2, What the Ministry Woke Up to. The owl arrived at Dumbledore's office at 7:30 on a Sunday morning, which was unusual. Ministry owls were punctual in the way of institutions. They operated on schedules, on business hours, on the understanding that the world of paperwork and procedure did not require urgency. They were not the kind of owls that arrived before breakfast. This one landed on his desk with the energy of something that had been flying through the night, ruffled its feathers once in what appeared to be personal indignation, and deposited a scroll of parchment sealed with 2 things: the ministry's standard administrative crest and something else. Something older, pressed into the wax beside the official seal, that made Dumbledore set down his tea and look at it very carefully before he broke it open. The Black Family Seal. The asterisk of stars surrounding the crest, the old Latin motto impressed into the wax with the particular depth of a signet ring that had been in the same family for centuries. He hadn't seen it on official correspondence in, well, a very long time. He opened the scroll. It was not long. Ministry documents rarely needed to be long when they were delivering something sufficiently serious. This one was 6 lines, the ministry heading at the top, and it said, in the dry, factual tone of a department that had been woken up in the middle of the night by its own monitoring systems going haywire. This office is to notify Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Chief Warlock of the Wisengamot and Headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, that on the date of June 14, 1985, a Rite of Kin-Claiming under Ancient House of Black protocols was successfully completed. The subject of the claim is one Harry James Potter, DOB July 31, 1980. The claiming party is one Nymphadora Andromeda Tonks, DOB November 11, 1973, acknowledged kin of the noble and most ancient House of Black. Secondary guardian designation has been automatically assigned to Sirius Orion Black, DOB November 3, 1959, per Black family succession law. This office will require a hearing within 30 days to confirm guardianship transference. All current guardianship arrangements are hereby suspended pending said hearing. The Department of Magical Family Services Ref. Ancient Law Division. Dumbledore read it twice. Then he set it down on his desk. Then he stood up and walked to the window and looked out over the school grounds in the pearl gray morning light for a long moment, his hands clasped behind his back. The grounds were empty, peaceful. The lake was flat and silver, and the beech tree at the edge threw one long shadow across the grass, and none of it bore any relation to what was currently happening inside his mind. He had made calculations when he placed Harry with the Dursleys. He had made careful, considered, painful calculations, weighing Harry's comfort against Harry's survival, weighing Lily's sacrificial magic against every other protective option available to him. He had placed those calculations in a room in his mind and had not reopened the door because the calculations were sound and the decision was made. He had not accounted for the Ancient Law Division. More specifically, he had not accounted for Andromeda Tonks. He had known she'd cut ties with the House of Black. He'd assumed she'd cut ties with everything connected to it, the law, the obligations, the machinery of ancient family magic that the modern wizarding world had mostly forgotten was still operational. He had been wrong. He sat back down. He pulled a fresh piece of parchment toward him. He began to write 3 letters by the end of breakfast. One to the Ministry, one to Andromeda Tonks, and one that he held for a moment, completed, before folding it and sealing it and feeling the specific discomfort of a man who knows he has made a mistake but cannot yet determine the precise shape of it. He sent them all. Then he had breakfast because he was 84 years old and had learned that crises were easier to navigate on a full stomach. The Ministry of Magic at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning was a specific kind of organized chaos. 1,000 people moving in 1,000 directions, with the efficiency of people who have been bureaucratic for so long that bureaucracy has become instinct. The atrium fountains ran, the golden statues gleamed, the fireplaces flared green at regular intervals, spitting out witches and wizards clutching their robes and their folders and their Monday morning expressions. Andromeda walked through it with Harry's hand in hers and Tonks on her other side, and she felt, as she always felt in this building, the particular texture of a place that had been built to make certain kinds of people feel small. She was a Black. She refused to feel small. "There are a lot of fires," Harry said, watching a woman step out of a fireplace and straighten her robes. "Those are fireplaces," Tonks said. "You travel in them. It's called flue. You just sort of fall through." Harry looked at the fireplaces with an expression of careful neutrality that Andromeda was already coming to recognize as his version of "that sounds alarming, but I'm not going to say so." "Later," Andromeda said. "Flue later. First we deal with the Ministry." The Department of Magical Family Services occupied the 4th floor, which told you something about where the Ministry's priorities sat in relation to family welfare. It was below the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, below the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, below the Improper Use of Magic Office. It was 2 floors above the Department of Mysteries, which Andromeda had always found quietly suggestive. The waiting room was full. Plastic chairs, a number ticket dispenser, and a bored witch behind a desk who was reading Witch Weekly with the dedication of someone who had decided engagement with her work was optional. There were 4 other families waiting, a couple with a toddler who was hovering 4 inches off the floor regardless of their attempts to bring him down, 2 elderly witches arguing quietly over a folder of documents, a man alone who looked like he'd been here since last week. Andromeda walked past the ticket dispenser. The witch behind the desk looked up. "Number, please. I have a scheduled appointment," Andromeda said. "Andromeda Tonks, Ancient Law Division." The witch looked at her, then at Tonks, then at Harry, who was looking around the room with his green eyes very steady and taking it all in, then back at Andromeda. "Ancient Law Division's down the end," she said, her voice shifting slightly into a different register, not deference, not exactly, but the specific attentiveness of someone who has realized they're dealing with something outside their Monday morning expectations. "3rd door on the left. They're expecting you." The Ancient Law Division was a small office that had the feeling of a place that was rarely visited but meticulously maintained, the way museums maintain exhibits nobody looks at. The shelves were full of texts in various states of antiquity, some in glass cases, some not, some in languages that Andromeda could read and some in languages even she couldn't. The parchment on the desk was piled in careful order. The quills were freshly cut. The wizard behind the desk was old. Not old in the ordinary way, old in the way of someone who has spent so long surrounded by ancient things that the antiquity has begun to rub off on them. He was thin and precise, and he wore half-moon spectacles that Andromeda suspected were not corrective but aesthetic, because his eyes behind them were sharp enough to cut. "Mrs. Tonks," he said, "I'm Cassius Ogden, head of the Ancient Law Division." He looked at Tonks. "And this is the claiming party." I'm Tonks, Tonks said. He's Harry, she pointed. She's Mum. Ogden looked at her for a moment, and something crossed his face that wasn't quite a smile but was in the neighborhood of one. Sit down, please, they sat. Ogden opened a folder on his desk, and Andromeda caught a glimpse of the top document, the Kin-Claim registration, black and silver text still faintly luminous on the official parchment, the kind of luminescence that meant the magic was still warm. To be clear about what we're dealing with, Ogden said, the Kin-Claim registration is valid. I've had 3 of my staff verify it this morning because frankly when the monitoring charms went off at 3 a.m. on Saturday I thought we'd had a malfunction. We haven't. The claim was correctly invoked, correctly sealed, and the House of Black has confirmed it. He looked over his spectacles at Andromeda. The last registered kin claim was in 1871. I'm aware, Andromeda said. The magic chose your daughter. Yes. Ogden looked at Tonks again. Tonks had changed her hair to red, apparently in honor of the occasion, and was swinging her legs from the chair because the chair was too tall for her feet to reach the floor. She noticed Ogden looking and swung her legs slightly more slowly in the manner of someone demonstrating that they were perfectly capable of sitting still if that was going to be a whole thing. You understand what the secondary designation means, Ogden said to Andromeda, lowering his voice slightly. Sirius Black. He's in Azkaban. I know, the secondary designation under Black family law gives him legitimate legal standing to petition for custody from within Azkaban. Yes, Andromeda said. I've read the law, Mr. Ogden. I've read all the relevant law. Sirius was never convicted by a jury. He never had a trial. She held Ogden's gaze steadily. That's a fact this ministry has been able to ignore for 4 years. The Kin-Claim registration makes it a great deal harder to continue ignoring it. Ogden looked at her for a long, careful moment. Then he wrote something in his folder. I see, he said. There will be a hearing in 28 days to confirm the guardianship transfer officially. At that hearing, the current guardians, the Dursleys are not current guardians, Andromeda said. They never had legal magical guardianship. They had informal placement under Albus Dumbledore's authority, which is not the same thing. The Kin-Claim supersedes informal placement automatically per Section 12 of the Ancient Law Statutes. Ogden wrote more things. There may be challenges, he said. There will absolutely be challenges, Andromeda said pleasantly. I look forward to them. They were back in the atrium by 11, which gave Andromeda time to steer Harry through the golden statue in the center. He stood in front of it for a long moment, looking up at the witch and wizard standing over the crouching muggle figure, and said nothing, but his face said something, a small frown between his brows before the fireplaces erupted and Dumbledore stepped out. He was wearing robes the color of deep twilight, and he had his wand in his hand and his half-moon spectacles in place, and he looked for all the world like what he was, the most powerful wizard in Britain, who was also a man who had just had his arrangements disrupted and was being very controlled about his feelings about that. Andromeda, he said, I'm glad I caught you. Albus, she said, and there was a pause that contained a great deal of compressed history. She was a Black. She'd come up in a world where Dumbledore was the name you said when you wanted to indicate that things would be all right, but she was also a woman who had received no letter, no notification, no communication of any kind when Dumbledore had placed Lily's son in a cupboard under some stairs in Surrey. Harry looked at Dumbledore with the same steady, taking-it-all-in gaze he'd been using all morning. Dumbledore looked back at him, and something happened in the old man's face, something that Andromeda recognized, the flicker of someone confronting the gap between what they decided in the abstract and what it looked like in a specific face. Harry was wearing new clothes. Andromeda had taken him to a shop the previous afternoon, a children's clothing shop in Oxford, the ordinary muggle kind, and let him pick things out, and he had done this with the careful, slightly disbelieving focus of someone being handed an unprecedented decision. He was wearing dark blue jeans that fit and a gray jumper, and the trainers Andromeda had bought him that actually had 2 functioning soles. He'd had a full dinner last night and a full breakfast this morning. He'd slept in a real bed in a room that Andromeda had cleared with brisk efficiency and that Tonks had immediately improved by charming small stars onto the ceiling. He looked in short like a child who had been taken care of. And the contrast with whatever Dumbledore had been holding in his mind when he thought Harry Potter safe in Surrey, that contrast was doing something to the old man's face. You're looking well, Harry, Dumbledore said. Thank you, Harry said politely. He did not say anything else. He did not offer Dumbledore the gap to fill. Tonks moved to stand next to Harry, not making a production of it, just shifting, ending up next to him. Her hair was still red. She looked at Dumbledore with her chin up and her brown eyes direct. Could we speak privately? Dumbledore said to Andromeda. The filing window for ancient law is open until 2, Andromeda said. I have additional documents to submit. I can give you 20 minutes. She looked at Tonks. Don't move from this atrium, don't go through any fires, and don't talk to anyone who comes to you with questions about Harry. I know, Tonks said. I mean it, Dora. I know, Mum. Andromeda followed Dumbledore to a bench near the fountain. He sat, she sat. The fountain ran pleasantly between them and neither of them looked at it. What you've done, Dumbledore began, is legal, Andromeda said. Is legal, he agreed. I want you to understand that I don't dispute that. The Kin-Claim is, he paused, and she could see him choosing his words with the care of someone who knows the ground is uneven. The magic made its choice, I respect that, but there are considerations, Andromeda, that the blood wards, she said. Yes, the blood wards require. I've spoken to 2 ward keepers, she said. Both confirmed that Lily's protection is keyed to Petunia's bloodline, not to Harry's physical location in Petunia's house. The wards will hold as long as Petunia Dursley is alive and living at that address. Harry being elsewhere does not break them. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The fountain ran. "You've been thorough," he said, and there was genuine respect in it, and also something that was not quite the beginning of guilt but was adjacent to it. "I always was," Andromeda said. "That's why you liked having me in the Order, and why you didn't like having me argue in meetings." A very small, very real smile crossed his face. It lasted a second, then it went away. He was safe. He was alive, Andromeda said. "They're different things, you know they're different things." Dumbledore looked at the fountain. The golden figures sparkled. "Yes," he said at last, "I know they're different things." "Good," Andromeda said. She stood. "I'm not asking your blessing for the Kin-Claim Albus. I'm telling you it exists and it's valid. You can attend the hearing if you'd like to make a formal statement. What you can't do is use your authority to override ancient magical law, and if you try, you will find that I know precisely which laws to invoke in response." She straightened her robes. "I am a black. It is occasionally useful." She walked back toward the atrium. Across the fountain, Harry was crouching next to the base of the golden statue, looking at the carving along its base. Tonks was next to him, also crouching. They were examining it together, and Tonks was saying something to him in a low voice, and Harry was nodding with his brows still furrowed in that particular way. "Dora," Andromeda said, "what are you doing?" Harry wanted to look at the statue, Tonks said. "He thinks it's rude." "Rude?" Harry stood up. He looked at the muggle figure crouching at the base of the wizard statues. "He's being squashed," he said. "Why is he being squashed?" Andromeda looked at the statue. She had walked past it dozens of times, and it had simply been part of the background architecture of the Ministry, impressive, golden, vaguely congratulatory. She looked at it now through Harry's eyes and felt, briefly, like something had been made very clear. "It was built a long time ago," she said, "by people who thought that was the right way to see things." "Is that why they kept it?" Harry asked. "Yes," she said. "Most places keep things long after they've stopped being right because changing things is complicated." Harry looked at the statue for one more moment. "I don't think he likes it," he said, meaning the carved muggle figure, and then he turned away from it entirely and put his hand in Andromeda's and said, "Can we go file the papers now?" She had not been prepared at any point in her life for the specific experience of being the adult who takes care of Harry Potter. She was finding it was a series of moments like this one, small, ordinary moments that were somehow not ordinary at all, that had weight to them, the weight of a thing that has been missing and is now incrementally being filled. "Yes," she said, "we can." The papers took an hour. Ogden's office produced the relevant forms, and Andromeda filled them in with the efficiency of someone who had spent the weekend reviewing every applicable statute. And Tonks sat on the floor with her back against the bookshelf and taught Harry how to draw a hippogriff, which she'd been shown by her father and which she produced by drawing a horse and then adding wings and a beak and hoping for the best. Harry's version had slightly too many legs. "Hippogriffs have 4, Tonks said. "Horses have 4 too," Harry said. So how do you know it's not just a horse with wings and a beak?" Tonks looked at him. "That's called a winged beaked horse." "Is that a real thing?" "No, so it has to be 4 legs for it to be a hippogriff." Tonks thought about this seriously. "Yes, 4 legs and a beak and wings, and it has to look proud. Hippogriffs always look proud. My dad says they have dignity." Harry added dignity to his drawing by making the head tilt slightly upward. Andromeda glanced over at it from the desk and thought privately that it was actually quite good. On the way out, passing back through the atrium, the fireplace flared and Cornelius Fudge stepped out, Minister for Magic, pink-faced in his lime-green bowler hat, carrying the particular expression of a man who had been briefed on something he didn't like and had come to make his feelings known. He spotted Andromeda, made a visible calculation, and changed course toward them. "Mrs. Tonks," he said. "I wonder if I might have a word." "Good morning, Minister," Andromeda said, without stopping walking. Fudge fell into step beside her, which required him to move at a somewhat undignified pace. "I've been briefed on this morning's registration," he said, lowering his voice with the energy of someone who hopes lowering your voice will make things more private in a large, echoing stone atrium. "I want to assure you that the Ministry takes these things very seriously and will be reviewing." "All you need to review," Andromeda said, "is the Kin-Claim registration, which is valid, and the hearing schedule, which has been confirmed. Beyond that, I'm not sure what conversation we're having." "There are considerations," Fudge said, "of a delicate nature regarding Harry Potter's the security implications that Dumbledore has been managing." "Dumbledore is not a guardian," Andromeda said. "And security considerations do not override ancient law. If you'd like to make a formal challenge, the hearing is in 27 days." Fudge looked at Harry, and Harry looked back at him with his green eyes perfectly steady and his new trainers on his feet and his hippogriff drawing still in his hand, and Fudge did the thing politicians always do when confronted with the specific human reality of their abstract policy decisions. He looked slightly unwell. Fudge started. "He looks fine," Tonks said from Harry's other side with absolute finality. "We're leaving now." Fudge stopped walking. They didn't. They made it to the visitor's entrance, an old phone box on a muggle street, and came up into the grey London morning, and Harry took a deep breath of outside air and looked up at the buildings and said, "Your family is really important, isn't it? The Black family." "The Black family was important," Andromeda said. "Whether it's still important depends on what you do with it. That's always been true." She looked down at him. "The name carries weight, the magic carries weight, those things can be used well or badly." "How did your family use them?" Harry asked. Andromeda was quiet for a moment. She flagged a taxi with one hand. "Badly," she said. "Almost always badly, until your friend over there decided to use them for you." Harry looked at Tonks. Tonks had found a pigeon on the pavement and was crouching in front of it with the focused attention of someone who has decided communication is possible. The pigeon was not fleeing, which Andromeda found either very brave or very stupid. I like her, Harry said, not with the performed emotion of a child trying to produce the expected feeling, just a statement of fact the way a scientist might note something they've observed and confirmed. Good, Andromeda said, she claimed you. If you didn't like her, that would be complicated. The taxi pulled up. They got in, Harry and Tonks in the back, and Tonks immediately commenced a detailed explanation to Harry about why pigeons were actually highly intelligent and underrated, referencing facts she had acquired from a book she'd read twice. And Harry listened with his chin propped on his hand, and the expression of someone who has just discovered that information can be delivered with enthusiasm rather than as an obligation. Andromeda watched them in the mirror the way she'd watched them in the car from Surrey, and thought about old magic and new beginnings, and the specific, complicated weight of a family name that had done terrible things and was, perhaps, being given the chance to do one right one. The letter from Dumbledore arrived that evening. Ted brought it in, holding it by the corner the way he held things that smelled faintly of magic and consequence, and set it on the kitchen table while Andromeda was helping Harry understand that the Tonks' kitchen did in fact have a stove and oven, and that she was going to show him how they worked because knowing how things worked was useful. She opened it while the pasta cooked. Dumbledore's handwriting was elegant and considered, the handwriting of a man who had written millions of words and knew how each one landed. Andromeda, it said, I owe you an honest conversation which I will offer at your convenience. I owe Harry more than a conversation. I do not intend to challenge the claim. I ask only that you allow me the opportunity to speak with him, not as any authority over him, but as someone who knew his parents and has thought of his well-being for 4 years in ways that were, as you rightly note, not sufficient. I understand if the answer is not yet. I hope it is someday. Yours sincerely, Albus. Andromeda read it twice. Then she folded it. She would give it a week before she decided anything. From the kitchen doorway came the sound of Tonks explaining to Harry that pasta came in different shapes for reasons, and that each shape held sauce differently, and this was not trivial. It was important, it was a whole thing, and Harry asking whether the shape affected the taste, which prompted Tonks to declare that this was the most interesting question about pasta she had ever heard, and that they needed to do an experiment. Ted appeared in the kitchen doorway behind Andromeda. He was a broad-shouldered, warm-faced man with brown hair going gray at the temples and an expression that he'd been wearing since Saturday evening, when Andromeda had come home with a new small person and explained what had happened, an expression of someone who is absorbing something large but absorbing it with goodwill. He ate everything on his plate again, Ted said quietly. I know, Andromeda said, and asked if it was all right if he had more. I know. Ted leaned against the doorframe and watched Harry and Tonks conducting their pasta shape experiment, which involved 4 different bowls and a great deal of discussion. His expression had shifted into something steadier and warmer, the way expressions settle when something has gone from abstract to real. He's going to be all right, Ted said, isn't he? Andromeda looked at her daughter explaining the aerodynamic properties of fusilli versus penne. She looked at Harry nodding gravely, taking this seriously. Yes, she said, he is, because of Dora, because someone chose him, Andromeda said, and he's smart enough to let them. Ted put his arm around her and she let herself lean briefly against his shoulder. Because she was tired and there was still so much ahead, the hearing, the Wisengamot, the Malfoys who would absolutely have an opinion, the secondary designation that pointed like a compass needle at a cell in Azkaban, and leaning for a moment was not weakness. It was what people who loved each other did. From the table, Harry said, Tonks, is your last name really Tonks? Yeah, Tonks said. Is that a normal name? No, Tonks said proudly. It's brilliant. I was just wondering, Harry said carefully, what my last name is. A pause. Tonks looked at Andromeda, who looked at Harry. His face was neutral, the careful neutral he deployed when he was asking something he thought might have a bad answer. You're Harry Potter, Andromeda said. Your parents were James and Lily Potter. You have your mother's eyes and your father's hair, and you are, as of Saturday, the person my daughter has decided to spend her time protecting, which means you have the backing of the House of Black and you are impossible to ignore. Harry looked at this information. He turned it over. He nodded once slowly, the way he nodded when something had been added to a list he was maintaining. Okay, he said. Does that work for you? Tonks asked. Harry looked at her. Yeah, he said. I think so. Good, Tonks said and slid another bowl of pasta toward him. Now try the penne for science. Later, after dinner, after Harry was in bed in the starlit room with his repaired rabbit and the soft sound of the street outside, Andromeda sat at her desk and did one more thing. She pulled a fresh piece of parchment and wrote 2 sentences, sealed it, and gave it to a ministry owl that had been waiting on the fence post outside since noon with the persistence of a civil servant who had been told not to come back without a response. The hearing in 27 days, she wrote. Come if you need to, Albus, but understand that nothing you say will change what the magic has decided. And perhaps consider that the magic has better instincts than either of us. The owl left. Andromeda watched it go. Upstairs, through the ceiling, she heard Tonks's voice. She'd apparently gone to check on Harry and stayed because she was Tonks saying something about stars, about the constellations visible from the window. About how the Black family had named all their children after stars and that technically Harry was now adjacent to that tradition, which she thought was funny because Harry's were not generally star names, but maybe they should make it one. Maybe there was a Harry somewhere in a constellation and they just hadn't looked hard enough. And Harry's voice quieter, maybe we could look. And Tonks, yeah, tomorrow I've got a book. Andromeda turned out the light in her study and thought about ancient magic that chose 5-year-olds, and ministry officials who went slightly pale when confronted with small boys and new trainers, and old men who wrote honest letters, and a cell in Azkaban where something had just pulled taut like a thread, and all the things that were coming down the road toward this house, toward these two children on the other side of the ceiling looking for Harry's name in the stars. She was not afraid of any of it. She was a Black. She had read all the relevant law, and her daughter, who had decided at age 5 that this boy needed a someone, had just reminded the entire wizarding world that the oldest magic in Britain did not ask for anyone's permission. Let them come to the hearing, she would be ready. Chapter 3, the house that learned his name, the Tonks house, was a 3-story terrace in a part of Oxford that couldn't quite decide whether it was academic or residential, and had settled into being both at once. Bookshops on the corner, a baker 2 streets over, a park with a duck pond that Tonks had declared sovereign territory on her 3rd birthday and had never fully relinquished. From the outside it looked like its neighbors. Bay windows, old brick, a front door painted dark green. The kind of house that suggested a family lived there and got on with things. Inside was different, not dramatically different, not Weasley Burrow different, where the magic was visible and joyful and completely indifferent to anything resembling conventional physics. The Tonks house was subtler than that. Things happened in it quietly, with the low-key confidence of magic that had been woven into a space over years rather than performed at it. The kettle put itself on when someone came downstairs in the morning. Books drifted back to their shelves when left on tables. The stairs creaked differently depending on who was on them, a specific creak for Ted, a different one for Andromeda, a quick bright sound for Tonks that was almost cheerful. On Harry's 3rd morning, the stairs made a new sound for him, something between a question and a greeting. He stopped on the 3rd step from the bottom and pressed his hand against the banister, and the wood was warm, slightly the way wood gets when a fire has been burning somewhere nearby. He stood there for a moment, hand on the banister, not moving. Tonks appeared at the top of the stairs behind him, hair in a spectacular morning disaster of mixed colors that she hadn't gotten around to controlling yet. What are you doing? The stairs made a noise, Harry said. They always make noises. A different one for me. Tonks came down 2 steps and pressed her hand on the banister too, head tilted, listening. Hush, she said, then with the easy acceptance of someone who has grown up surrounded by magic that behaves like a domestic animal. I think the house likes you. Harry took his hand off the banister. He looked at it, then at the wall beside the stairs, then at the ceiling. The way he looked at things, quietly and seriously, like he was filing information, like the world was a text he was learning to read, was already something Andromeda had started recognizing as characteristic. He didn't react to things immediately. He observed first always, and the reaction came after, considered and deliberate. Houses can like people, he said. Magic houses can. Tonks dropped down the remaining stairs, missing every other one in her customary method that had given Andromeda approximately 40 heart attacks over 5 years. Ours has been here since my grand's time. That's a lot of time to develop opinions. Your grand's time, Harry said, following her toward the kitchen. Mum's mum, she was a Black too before she married. Tonks opened the kitchen door and immediately the kettle began to run. The Blacks were really into houses that knew things. Grimmauld Place knows everything. Mum says she doesn't like going there. What's Grimmauld Place? The main Black house in London. We don't really use it. Tonks pulled open a cabinet and surveyed the cereal options with focused authority. Mum says it's full of bad memories and an elf who won't leave. Harry sat at the kitchen table and arranged himself in the chair with the specific self-conscious care of someone who is still getting used to being allowed to simply sit somewhere. He'd been doing it for 3 days. Every meal, every room he entered, he chose a spot and then spent a brief moment reassuring himself that he was permitted to occupy it. It was the kind of thing you didn't notice unless you were watching for it. Andromeda noticed. She didn't comment. She just watched it happen and waited for the day it stopped. She came downstairs 20 minutes later to find them at the table with cereal, a map of Britain spread between the bowls, and a running argument about where dragons were most likely to be found in the present day. They're in Wales, Tonks said with great certainty. The Welsh green is indigenous. But are there wild ones, Harry asked, or only ones that people keep? There are reserves, Ted said from behind his newspaper. He was already at the table, had been since 6:30, the habit of a man who commuted to London for work and used the early morning quiet like fuel. Dragon reserves in Wales and Romania. They're not wild, they're managed, like parks. Parks with dragons, Harry said, basically. Ted lowered the paper and looked at Harry over it, the warm-faced, unhurried look he had, the look that said, I have all the time in the world and you can ask whatever you want. Nesting grounds, the whole thing. People who work there are called dragon keepers. It's considered one of the more impressive jobs in the wizarding world because the life expectancy is, well, you have to really love dragons. I want to be one, Tonks said. A dragon, Harry asked. A dragon keeper. She looked at him, or an auror. What's an auror? Dark wizard catcher, like police but for magic, she considered. I want to be both, but Mum says that's too dramatic even for me. It's not that it's dramatic, Andromeda said, coming in with the particular fluid efficiency of a woman who had been running a household for years and could prepare a full breakfast while holding a conversation without looking at either. It's that they're different departments with different training and qualifications, and you'd have to choose. I could do both. You're 5. I'll be 6 in November. You'll still only be one person. Tonks looked at Harry. Harry was tracking this exchange with the expression of someone watching a tennis match that is also somehow about something larger than tennis. His mouth twitched. What do you want to do? Tonks asked him. Harry thought about this with his chin in his hands. Nobody had ever asked him that before. His expression said clearly, and the novelty of it was visible as a physical thing. I don't know, he said. I didn't know there were options before. The table went quiet for a moment, not awkwardly, but with the gentleness of people who understand what a sentence means under its words. There are loads of options, Tonks said, with the specific kindness of stating something factual rather than offering comfort, which was exactly the right approach. We'll figure it out. Yeah, Harry said. Okay. Ted went back to his paper. The map stayed on the table. The kettle offered tea to everyone who wanted it, in the quiet, helpful way the house had, and Harry wrapped both hands around his mug and looked out the kitchen window at the morning, and the frown between his brows was a little less deep than it had been yesterday. 2 weeks in, they settled into a shape. Mornings were Ted, breakfast, the paper, conversations about whatever Harry had found to wonder about, which changed daily. One morning it was underground rivers. The next it was how airplanes worked. The next it was whether trees communicated with each other, which Tonks told him they absolutely did, and produced a book about it, which was not a magical book. It was a book from the library about mycological networks, which she had acquired by the simple method of going to the library and asking the librarian for the most interesting book they had about plants and taking what she was given. Harry read the whole thing in 2 days. He handed it back to Tonks with 3 questions he'd written on a piece of paper, actual written questions, neat and small, and Tonks read them and said, "Right, we're going to the library." And that was how they became the kind of children who spent Tuesday afternoons in the science section of the Oxford Public Library, which the librarian found extremely gratifying. Afternoons were different. Andromeda had started them on basic magical theory, not wand work. They were too young for wand work, but the foundations. Magic was a language before it was a skill, she told them. You had to understand what you were saying before you could say it deliberately, so the afternoons were about understanding. She taught them the theory of intent, that magic responded to clarity of purpose, that vague wishes produced vague results, that precision wasn't about restriction, but about the difference between light and the specific light of a candle flame at 2 in the morning. She taught them about the way different magical traditions interacted, how ancient family magic like the black workings operated on different principles than taught wand work, which operated on different principles than innate magic like Harry's wild bursts of it. Harry was frightening, not in any dangerous sense, but in the sense that when you gave him a principle he understood it completely, immediately, and then asked a question that suggested he'd already thought 3 steps further down the line. He would sit in the afternoon lessons with his chin in his hands and listen to Andromeda explain intent, and then say something like, "So the wand is helping you be precise, but the precision has to be in you first and the wand just amplifies it like a lens." And Andromeda would look at him and think, yes, that's exactly it. That is a concept third-year Hogwarts students struggle with. He's extraordinary, she told Ted at night. He's also going to be trouble, Ted said, not unkindly. Oh, absolutely. In the good way, Andromeda thought about Harry asking questions 3 steps ahead. In the very good way, Tonks's magic was a different animal entirely. Where Harry was precise and considered, Tonks was instinctive. She felt things first and they came out of her before she'd properly decided to do them, and the trick for her was learning to catch the impulse before it expressed itself as chaos and redirect it as intention. She could change any aspect of her appearance without any apparent effort but couldn't reliably float a feather. She could feel other people's emotions like a physical texture. She told Andromeda this the way children report facts about the world matter-of-factly, and this was its own kind of magic that Andromeda was still figuring out how to address. "I'm an empath," Tonks had said, fascinated. "Is that rare?" "Relatively," Andromeda had said. "Don't tell people casually." 3 weeks in, Tonks started teaching Harry how to ride a broom. This happened because Ted had found a pair of old training brooms in the attic, low-hover models, the kind designed for children that wouldn't go higher than 6 feet or faster than a running pace without active adult override, and had brought them down without really thinking about it. Tonks had looked at them the way Tonks looked at things she had decided were immediately hers, and Harry had looked at them with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and failing. "Have you been on a broom?" Tonks asked. "No, do you want to be?" A pause. "Yes," Harry said. They took them to the park with the duck pond. Andromeda came, partly to supervise and partly because she had a book she wanted to read on the bench while this happened. The park was quiet on a Wednesday morning, 1 elderly man with a terrier, 2 women with a pram, and no one near the duck pond, which was in a dip behind a stand of willows and effectively private from the path. Tonks had been on a broom since she was 3 and approached it the way she approached most physical things, immediately, fearlessly, and with an improvisational quality that worked brilliantly most of the time and occasionally resulted in the sort of impact that would later be described as a learning experience. "Put your hand over it," she told Harry. "Say up." Harry put his hand over the broom. Up. The broom came up and smacked into his palm with an eagerness that made him stagger slightly. He looked at it. His expression was the clearest Andromeda had ever seen it, not the careful neutral, not the considered observation, but something entirely unguarded, sheer unmediated delight. He looked at the broom in his hand like it was the most correct thing that had ever happened. Swing your leg over, Tonks said, already on hers and hovering at 2 feet, arms out for balance. And then push off. Harry swung his leg over. He pushed off. He did not require any further instruction. This was the thing that caught everyone later when they tried to explain it. He didn't wobble. He didn't overcorrect. He went up to the training broom's maximum hover height, 6 feet, hovering over the grass, the pond glittering below and to the left, and he sat on the broom with the comfortable assurance of someone who had been doing it for years, and looked down at Tonks and grinned. Not the careful, provisional smile he'd been producing for 3 weeks, the smile that was always testing whether smiling was allowed. A real grin, huge, gap-toothed because he had a tooth working loose, entirely helpless, the kind of grin that takes over a face without asking. "Oh," Tonks said, looking up at him, "you're one of those." "What? A natural." She said it without resentment, with the genuine appreciation of someone who loves something enough to be glad when they meet others who love it too. "Some people are just made for brooms. My dad says it's in some family lines." She tilted her head. "Potter line, apparently." "My dad flew," Harry said, and the grin was still there, but something else had come into it, something more complicated. "Your dad was a chaser for Gryffindor," Andromeda said from her bench. She had not opened her book. "James Potter, he was apparently excellent." She looked at Harry on the broom, 6 feet up, completely at home in a way she hadn't seen him be completely at home anywhere yet. "I can see it." Harry looked at the sky, at the opening above the willows where it went up and up and up. The training broom hummed faintly beneath him, its enchanted governors preventing him from going higher. His eyes tracked the sky the way eyes track something they want. "Later," Andromeda said, accurately reading the direction of his gaze. "When you're older." "Real brooms when you're older." Harry looked down at her. His chin went up slightly, not defiance, just consideration, the look of someone noting a rule and deciding whether they agree with it. He decided he agreed with it. "Okay," he said, and dropped back to hover beside Tonks, and they flew loops over the duck pond for an hour while Andromeda sat on the bench and did not read a single page of her book. The letter arrived on a Thursday, 4 weeks after the Kin-Claim. Not from the ministry, they'd had 3 of those, all about the upcoming hearing. Not from Dumbledore, she'd received 2 more of his, careful and honest, which she was cautiously warming to. This one came on thick, cream-colored parchment that had a distinctive weight to it, the weight of expensive paper used by people who could afford to make a statement with their stationery. The Malfoy crest was pressed into the wax. Andromeda opened it at the kitchen table after the children were in bed. Ted sat across from her, tea in hand, reading it over her shoulder. It was from Lucius. Short, as his letters always were, the brevity of a man who considered his time worth more than elaboration. "Andromeda, the claim has been noted. Certain members of the Wisengamot have concerns about the precedent this sets and about the elevation of a Muggle-born's welfare to black family obligation. A conversation would be preferable to a hearing. I suggest we speak before the month's end." Ted read it. "He's worried." "Very," Andromeda said. "About Harry or about the black name being used for something he didn't sanction?" "Both," Andromeda said, "but mostly the latter. Lucius cares about the House of Black insofar as it gives him something to leverage. If we use it for Harry, that's a black precedent that he can't use the same way again." She folded the letter. "He'll come to the hearing with allies. Are we ready for that?" "Not yet." She stood, tucking the letter in her robe pocket. "But we will be." The next morning, she started Harry and Tonks on something new. She brought the grimoire down from the locked shelf, not the most dangerous one, but the second one, the one with silver clasps that Tonks had read without permission and apparently retained with alarming accuracy. She put it on the kitchen table and opened it to the section she'd been thinking about for days. The Kin-Claim had established protections. But it had also established rights that Harry could invoke, rights that the House of Black was bound to honor, rights that were old enough to predate most of the objections anyone could raise. She wanted Harry to understand what those rights were, not as information, as his. "This is about you," she said, sitting across from both of them. "This section describes what the claim means for you specifically, what you're owed, what you can invoke, what the House of Black must provide." Harry looked at the grimoire. Then at Andromeda. "Can I read it?" "Yes." He pulled it toward him and began to read. He read carefully, slowly, the way he did everything, without skipping, without guessing at words he didn't know but asking about them, building his understanding from the ground up. Tonks read over his shoulder and occasionally said, "Oh, that's what that means," with the tone of someone rereading something they'd memorized without fully understanding. Halfway through the relevant section, Harry stopped. He put his finger on a line. He read it again. Then he looked up at Andromeda with his green eyes very direct and clear. "It says a secondary guardian has legal standing to petition for release from Azkaban through the claim," he said, "if they were imprisoned without trial." Andromeda was quiet. "Sirius Black was named secondary guardian," Harry said. "You told me that." "Yes." "Did he have a trial?" A long moment. Outside, the Oxford street was going about its ordinary morning, a dog barking, someone's car not quite starting, the rhythm of a neighborhood waking up. Inside, the kitchen was very still. "No," Andromeda said, "he didn't." Harry looked at the grimoire, at the line with his finger on it. His face went through something, not a visible emotion exactly, but a shift, a settling, like tumblers in a lock aligning. "Then we should do this," he said. "Not we could, not maybe we could, we should." Tonks looked at him, then at her mother. Andromeda looked back at Harry, at this 5-year-old boy who had been in her house for 4 weeks and had gone from a child who asked permission to sit in a chair to a child who read ancient grimoires and identified legal remedies with the calm certainty of someone who has decided that things that are wrong should be made right. We should, Andromeda agreed. Who's Sirius Black? Tonks asked. Your cousin, Andromeda said, and Harry's godfather. Tonks took this in. Then she took the grimoire back from Harry and found the line he'd been reading and read it herself. Her hair went the quiet, considering blue it went when she was working something through. It'll take a while, she said, the legal process. That's okay, Harry said, we have time. He said it the way you say something that is simply true, simply obvious, the way someone says the sky is gray today or the kettle's boiled. As if the length of a thing had no bearing on whether it was worth doing, as if patience were not a virtue but just the only sensible approach to large problems. Andromeda had the sudden, startling thought that Harry Potter was going to be extraordinary. Not because of the prophecy, not because of the scar, not because destiny had apparently decided to run through him like a waterway, but because of exactly this quality of a person who looks at something wrong and says, simply and without drama, we should fix this, and then does the work. I'll start the petition this week, she said. Harry nodded. He pushed the grimoire back to the middle of the table where they could all see it. Can we read the rest? He asked. I want to understand all of it. Yes, Andromeda said. We can read the rest. They read all morning. The house kept the tea warm without being asked. That afternoon, Harry's magic did something new. He and Tonks were in the back garden. The Tonks garden was nothing like the Dursleys. It was slightly overgrown in the way of a garden that people intend to tend and get around to intermittently, with a large oak at the back that had grown into the fence and a flower bed along one side that bloomed with aggressive enthusiasm every summer. Harry was sitting under the oak. Tonks was attempting to charm a sparrow into landing on her hand, which the sparrow was refusing to do on principle. Harry was thinking. Andromeda could tell because she was watching from the upstairs window while she filed documents, and his expression had gone to that particular quality of still concentration that preceded things. He was thinking about Sirius Black, about a cell in Azkaban, about what a cell in Azkaban felt like. He couldn't know, obviously. He was 5 years old and had never been to Azkaban. But he had spent 4 years in a cupboard under the stairs, and he knew what it felt like to be in a small, dark space and have no one come. He knew what it felt like to be kept and not held, to be managed rather than loved, to be someone's obligation rather than someone's person. The garden went very still. The flowers along the border, late summer things, slightly past their best, straightened, every stem at once lifting. The oak above Harry spread slightly the way a canopy spreads when wind moves through it, except there was no wind. The light in the garden changed as if a cloud had moved, except the sky was clear. Harry looked up at the oak. The oak looked, and this was the only word for it, concerned. The way trees look concerned in old stories, present, aware. Tonks, Harry said. She was watching. The sparrow had apparently decided that this was interesting enough to abandon its dignified refusal and had landed on her knee. Yeah, she said quietly, I think the garden's doing something. I think it's responding to you, Tonks said, like the stairs. Harry looked at his hands. The faint luminescence that had appeared during the Kin-Claim and faded was there again, barely visible, a warmth in the palms. I was thinking about someone in a small dark place, he said, and the garden opened. Tonks was quiet for a moment. The sparrow sat very still on her knee. Because you didn't like thinking about it, she said, not a question. Yeah, so you made more space. She looked at the stretched canopy, the lifted flowers, the changed light. Your magic makes more space when you feel closed in. Harry looked at this assessment. Yeah, he said, I think so. The flowers settled slowly. The canopy eased back. The light went ordinary again. Harry pressed both palms flat on the grass, and the warmth in them soaked into the earth and was gone, and the garden was just a garden again, slightly overgrown, the oak old and ordinary. Andromeda turned from the window and sat at her desk. She added a note to the file she was building for the hearing. HP responsive to emotional states, environmental influence, range already apparent, not raw, already partially shaped by instinct. Notable. Then she crossed out notable and wrote extraordinary. Downstairs, a door opened. Ted coming home early, briefcase thudking on the hall table, voice calling anyone home. Kitchen, Tonks yelled, although they were in the garden. Garden, love, Andromeda said from upstairs. Why is there a sparrow in the hall? Ted called. That's my sparrow, Tonks yelled. Don't touch Gerald. The sparrow's name is Gerald, Harry said. Just now it is, Tonks said with complete authority. Harry started laughing. Not the small, tentative laugh from the garden at Privet Drive, a real one, unself-conscious, head dropping forward, the laugh of someone who has forgotten to check whether it's allowed. It came out of him like something that had been waiting, and in the garden the flowers did not lift this time, the canopy did not spread, because this feeling was not the closed-in kind. This was the opposite. This was open. Andromeda heard it from upstairs and pressed her hand flat on the desk the way she'd pressed it against the wall at Privet Drive, needing something solid because some things were too large to hold standing up. Harry Potter had laughed properly helplessly for the first time she'd witnessed. Over a sparrow named Gerald, she thought Lily would have loved this. She thought James would have already named for more birds. She thought 24 days until the hearing, and Lucius Malfoy has allies, and Sirius Black is in a cell above a gray sea, and Voldemort is out there somewhere diminished but not gone, and there is so much still to come. And then she thought, let it come. She was a Black, and her house knew Harry's name now, and the stairs made a new sound for him, and the garden opened when he needed it to, and downstairs her daughter was explaining the naming of sparrows to her husband while a 5-year-old boy laughed like he just remembered what laughing was. The hearing was in 24 days. She would be ready long before that. Chapter 4. Old Names, Old Debts. The Wisengamot chamber smelled like history and intimidation, which Andromeda suspected was deliberate. It was a circular room deep in the ministry's lower levels, the kind of space that had been built to make whoever stood in the center of it feel the weight of every person watching from the tiered seats above. The wood was dark and old, the lighting came from floating candles that cast everything in amber and shadow, and the ceiling was high enough that sound traveled strangely, whispers carried, and the shuffle of robes on the gallery benches arrived a half-second late, like an echo of movement rather than movement itself. Andromeda had been here before. She'd sat in the gallery as a girl, watching her father conduct House of Black business with the smooth, terrible authority of a man who knew that everyone in the room either feared or needed him. She'd sat in the gallery during the Death Eater trials after Voldemort fell and watched people she'd grown up with be sentenced, watching their faces as the verdicts came down, watching the chamber decide what they were worth. She had never stood at the center of it. She stood there now, and the weight of it was real, and she let it sit on her shoulders and did not let it show on her face. Harry was not here. She'd been clear about that. He would not be brought to this chamber, would not be displayed or examined or made to stand in the center of anything while adults argued about his life over his head. He was at home with Ted. Tonks was here, though, sitting in the public gallery with her chin on the railing and her hair a deliberately controlled dark brown, because Andromeda had asked her to look unremarkable today, and Tonks had interpreted this as not traffic cone orange while feeling no obligation to go further than that. She had a folder in front of her. Inside the folder were 38 pages of referenced, sourced, impeccably formatted legal arguments, all of which she had prepared herself over the past 3 weeks, none of which she expected to need in full. She knew how these things went. She had grown up watching them. The Wisengamot was 63 people seated in the tiered horseshoe above her. Of those, she had assessed 41 as genuinely neutral, 12 as likely sympathetic, and 10 as problems. She knew the 10 problems by name. 7 of them were people whose names appeared in connections to the Death Eater trials, never charged, never implicated directly, but adjacent. The kind of adjacent that careful people maintained. 3 of the remaining 10 were simply traditionalists of the sort who disliked precedent being set in directions they hadn't approved. And in the front row of the gallery, not on the Wisengamot itself, because Lucius Malfoy was not a Wisengamot member, he had simply ensured that several of the 10 problems were sat Lucius Malfoy. He was, as ever, impeccably composed. White blonde hair, dark robes, the silver-topped cane resting across his knees with the affected ease of a weapon at rest. He looked at Andromeda when she took her position at the center of the chamber, and he inclined his head fractionally. A greeting between people who understand each other precisely. Andromeda inclined hers back. Yes, the gesture said, I see you, I expected you, I've planned for you. The chief warlock, not Dumbledore, who had recused himself citing personal interest, but an elderly witch named Griselda Marchbanks who had the face of someone who had seen everything twice and been impressed by none of it, called the chamber to order with a tap of her wand on the bench. The matter before this body, Marchbanks said, in a voice that carried without effort, is the confirmation of a kin-claiming registered under ancient House of Black protocols on June 14th of this year. The subject is Harry James Potter. The claiming party is Nymphadora Andromeda Tonks. The Ministry's Ancient Law Division has validated the registration as genuine and correctly invoked. She looked at Andromeda. Do you have representation? I represent myself, Andromeda said. A small stir in the gallery. Marchbanks didn't react to it. Any challenges to the claim's validity are to be registered before we proceed to confirmation. Are there challenges? A wizard in the 3rd tier stood. He was a heavy-set man named Runcorn, and he was one of the 10. The Wisengamot questions the appropriateness of the claim on several grounds, he said, in the manner of someone reading from a prepared text, which he was. First, the claiming party is a minor. Second, the claiming party is the daughter of a known blood traitor. If the chamber is going to use that term, Andromeda said, her voice perfectly level, I'd like it formally noted in the record. Runcorn paused. Blood traitor, Andromeda said. Please write that down, I'll be returning to it. Marchbanks made a small sound that might have been approval and gestured to the recording quill, which dutifully scratched in the corner. Runcorn, flustered in the way of people who have used a word habitually and are not used to being asked to own it, continued. The claiming party is the daughter of Andromeda Tonks, née Black, who was removed from the Black family registry. I was not removed from the Black family magic, Andromeda said. I was removed from the tapestry. These are different things. The tapestry is decorative, the magic is not. Runcorn shuffled his notes. Furthermore, he said, recovering, the claim designates Sirius Orion Black as secondary guardian, which this body considers inappropriate given that he's imprisoned, Andromeda said. Yes, we'll address that separately. Continue. Runcorn sat down with the look of someone who had been planning to say more and found the ground gone from under the rest of his points. A second wizard stood, Montague, also on her list, and made a more organized argument about the suitability of Harry Potter being raised outside a traditional wizarding household, which Andromeda let him finish before she opened her folder. May I respond to both challenges together, she said to Marchbanks. Marchbanks gestured. The kin claim, Andromeda said, is not an administrative process. It is not an application, a petition, or a request for the Wisengamot's approval. It is a completed magical act. The magic of the House of Black evaluated the circumstances, evaluated the individuals involved, and chose to bind. This chamber is here to confirm that binding, not to assess its wisdom after the fact, because the magic does not require your assessment. She let that sit for a moment, watching the faces and the tears. Section 1 of the Ancient Law Statutes, the founding document of this body's jurisdiction over old family magic, states explicitly, the claiming magic of an ancient house once sealed is irrevocable and supersedes all subsequent guardianship arrangements regardless of their origin. The word is irrevocable. The chamber does not reverse irrevocable magical bindings. The question, Runcorn said from his seat, is not reversal but confirmation. This body can withhold confirmation. Withholding confirmation does not break the claim, Andromeda said. It merely means you have declined to acknowledge something that exists with or without your acknowledgement. She paused, like gravity. In the gallery above and to the right, Tonks made a sound that she converted at the last moment into a cough. Andromeda did not look at her. The question of my daughter being a minor is addressed in Section 7, Andromeda continued, pulling the relevant page from her folder and holding it up. Children of ancient houses who invoke a kin claim do so under the authority of the house's accumulated magic, not their individual capacity. The minor claiming party's guardianship is practically exercised by their parent or guardian, in this case myself, until such time as they come of age. There is precedent for this. The claim of 1623, the claim of 1749. Those are Black family claims, Montague said. We only have Black family records. The Black family is the only ancient house to have used the kin claiming in the modern period, Andromeda said. That makes it exclusively relevant precedent, not weak precedent. She set the page down. I am aware that several members of this body have been briefed by external parties on objections to this claim. She looked briefly and directly at Lucius Malfoy in the gallery. He met her gaze with the composed pleasantness of a man at the theater. I am further aware that those objections are primarily about the precedent this claim sets, that the House of Black has used its ancient authority to extend protection to a half-blood child, which suggests it might be used similarly in future, which certain people find inconvenient. She turned back to the chamber. The House of Black has not always used its authority well, she said, and she put something real into this, something that cost her slightly to say publicly. It has been a name associated with darkness, with violence, with exactly the kind of thinking that produced the war this country just emerged from. I am a Black. I know this better than anyone in this room because most of you only watched it from a distance. She let the silence hold for a moment. What happened in a garden in Surrey 6 weeks ago was not a political act. It was a 5-year-old child recognizing another child who had been forgotten, and the House of Black's magic agreeing with her assessment. The House of Black's magic has never agreed with bad decisions. That is what makes it old. That is what makes it powerful. Another pause. If this chamber finds a reason to deny confirmation, then this chamber will have gone on the record as holding that an orphan child with no magical guardian is better served by informal placement with non-magical relatives who have not been assessed by any official body than by the legal protection of one of the oldest houses in Britain. She closed her folder. I'd like to see that written down too. The chamber was quiet. The kind of quiet that meant people were thinking, not the kind that meant they'd been silenced, a real quiet with the quality of reconsideration. Marchbanks looked at the room. We'll break for 15 minutes, she said. The 15 minutes happened in 3 different conversations that Andromeda was party to simultaneously. Marchbanks herself came down from the bench and spoke to her quietly near the chamber entrance. She was not hostile. Andromeda had known she wouldn't be. Griselda Marchbanks had examined Dumbledore's OWLs 60 years ago and found them satisfactory and had been a rigorous legal mind ever since. She wanted to confirm the secondary designation process. Andromeda walked her through it efficiently, all the relevant sections. 3 Wisengamot members approached with variations on the same concern. They had no objection to the claim, but they wanted assurance that this didn't open a legal pathway for any child of any ancient house to claim any other child for any reason. This was the traditionalist worry, not the Death Eater adjacent one, and it was actually a legitimate question. Andromeda explained the conditions required for the magic to trigger: genuine recognition, genuine need, genuine bond. The magic had safeguards built in that no ministry regulation could replicate because the magic was several hundred years older than the ministry. The 5th conversation was the one she'd been waiting for. Lucius came to her unhurried while the chamber emptied and refilled around them. He moved through a crowd the way he always had, not parting it by force but by the simple assumption of his own passage, which accomplished the same thing. You argued well, he said. I know, Andromeda said. The claim will be confirmed. He said it the way a person says the weather forecast, certain, neutral, prior to the point. You've made that outcome inevitable. Congratulations. Thank you, Andromeda said, matching his pleasantness precisely. The secondary designation, however. He turned to look at the chamber, his profile composed and cool. Sirius Black's situation is complex. A petition for release is being prepared, Andromeda said. The ministry will not welcome it. The ministry will find it difficult to deny it once it's formally before them, Andromeda said. Sirius was never tried. That fact becomes significantly harder to sidestep when there is an active legal process compelling examination of his imprisonment. Lucius was quiet for a moment. The silver-topped cane turned once in his hand. "What do you want, Andromeda?" he said, and his voice had dropped to something quieter and more real, stripped of the public register. "What I've always wanted," she said, "what my mother's family should have wanted from the beginning, decent people treated decently." She turned to look at him, and she did not soften the look. "You've been very clever, Lucius. You've kept your name clean and your alliances intact, and you've managed the transition from one political climate to another with remarkable skill. I respect the intelligence, if not the choices." She paused. "But I am coming for the secondary designation. I am coming for Sirius's trial, and I have been reading Black family law since before your son was born. Be careful about what you challenge." Lucius looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes, not fear. Lucius Malfoy was too controlled for visible fear, but something that was its cousin, an acknowledgement of terrain. "Narcissa," he said, "would like to meet the boy." This was unexpected enough that Andromeda felt it register, kept her face still. "She has her own feelings about Black family matters," he said. "You would do well to hear them." A pause. "She's not my ambassador in this. She comes as herself." Andromeda said nothing for a moment, reading him the way Blacks were trained from childhood to read people, every muscle, every stillness, the quality of the silence around a statement. He was telling the truth. That was, in its way, almost more interesting than a lie would have been. "I'll consider it," she said. Marchbanks called the chamber back to order. The confirmation vote was 47 to 12. The 12 who voted against were exactly the 10 on Andromeda's list, plus 2 surprises she filed away for later examination. 47 to 12 in the Wisengamot for the claim of an Andromeda Tonks was not a slim majority. It was, historically speaking, a significant one. Marchbanks signed the official confirmation. The recording quill produced 3 copies, one for Ministry Records, one for the Ancient Law Division, one for Andromeda, and each copy carried at its top, in the silver-black ink that meant ancient magic had countersigned, the words of the claim itself. Harry James Potter, kinbound to Nymphadora Andromeda Tonks, House of Black, confirmed. Andromeda folded her copy carefully. She put it in her folder between the legal arguments she hadn't needed to use. In the gallery, Tonks had turned her hair a small, private gold, not bright, not announcing itself, just warm. She was looking down at her mother with an expression that Andromeda recognized from the garden in Surrey, the expression her daughter wore when she decided something was right and the world had agreed with her. Andromeda allowed herself a single moment of something that was very close to triumph. Then she picked up her folder and walked out of the chamber. The ride home on the Underground was an experience Harry had specifically requested because he had seen a tube map on Ted's desk and asked about it with such focused curiosity that Ted had promised to take him, and this had led to a Sunday expedition that had become something of a weekly fixture. Andromeda didn't take the tube back from the Ministry ordinarily, she apparated, or use the flue, both faster and more dignified, but today she did, because she wanted the ordinary rhythm of a train and a map in Harry's ongoing commentary about the engineering of underground transit. She got home to find Harry and Ted at the kitchen table with the tube map and 3 issues of a children's encyclopedia about engineering, and Harry mid-sentence about why circular tunnels were structurally superior to rectangular ones, which he'd apparently read somewhere. And Ted was arguing back with the genuine enthusiasm of a man who has found an intellectual equal in unexpected form, and Gerald the Sparrow was on the windowsill, apparently a permanent resident now. How did it go? Ted asked. "Confirmed," Andromeda said. Harry looked up from the map. He looked at her face for a moment, reading it. "We won," he said. "We confirmed what was already true," Andromeda said. "But yes, we won." Harry nodded. He went back to the tube map. Then he said without looking up, "Did Malfoy come?" Andromeda paused in setting down her folder. "You know that name?" "It was in the grimoire," Harry said. "The Black family section. He's married to Narcissa Black. He's one of the people most likely to object to the claim." He traced a tube line with one finger, the central line red and straight across the map. "I figured he'd come." Ted was looking at Harry with the expression he'd been wearing with increasing frequency over the past weeks, the expression of a man who has been consistently underestimating something and keeps finding out. "He came," Andromeda said. "What did he say?" "He said the confirmation was inevitable and that Narcissa wants to meet you." She watched Harry's face carefully. "I told him I'd consider it." Harry thought about this. His finger stopped on the map. "Is she dangerous?" "She's a Malfoy and a Black," Andromeda said. "She's very intelligent and she loves her son above everything else, which means her decisions are made through that lens." She sat down at the table. "She might be useful actually, or she might be trying to gather information for Lucius. I don't know yet which." "Can I come to the meeting?" Harry said. "If you decide to have one." "No," Andromeda said. "Then not the first one." "Okay," Harry said, and went back to the map without argument, which was not because he lacked an opinion but because he understood the logic, and Harry always respected logic. "Can we start on the petition for Sirius this week?" "Monday," Andromeda said. "I want to help." "You will." She looked at him, at the top of his dark head bent over the tube map, at the glasses on his nose that she'd had properly repaired the second week, at the gray jumper he'd picked for himself from the shop in Oxford and that fit him now, that was his. She thought about the chamber today, about 47 to 12, about Lucius Malfoy's eyes doing the calculation of a man who is beginning to understand the shape of the opposition. She thought about Sirius in Azkaban and the thread that had pulled taut in his chest 6 weeks ago, and the petition that she was going to put before the ministry that would make it very, very difficult for them to continue ignoring a man who had never been tried. She thought about how much was still coming down the road and how it kept not frightening her, which she was beginning to think was not recklessness but something more accurate. She had read all the relevant law. She had a daughter who could claim things with ancient magic and a ward who could read grimoires and identify legal remedies and felt the garden open when he needed space. She was a black, they were all going to be fine. Mum, Tonks said from the doorway. She'd come in behind Andromeda, had gone straight upstairs to change out of the dark brown hair and was now a vivid purple, the color she defaulted to when she felt good about things. I told Gerald what happened. He seemed pleased. The Sparrow, Ted said, does not have opinions about Wisengamot proceedings. He absolutely does, Tonks said, and went to the windowsill and held her finger out, and Gerald stepped onto it with an expression that was, in fact, quite composed. He's very politically aware. Harry looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at Harry. Congratulations, Harry said to the Sparrow gravely. Gerald ruffled his feathers once, which Tonks took as acknowledgement, and Harry's mouth curved up at the corner in the small private smile that Andromeda had started being able to tell apart from all his other smiles, the one that meant he was genuinely, quietly, simply happy. That evening she wrote the first draft of the petition for Sirius Black's trial review. She worked until midnight, and when she came to the section that required listing the grounds for the imprisonment's illegality, she wrote carefully and extensively and did not stop until she had filled 4 pages with arguments so airtight they would have made her father furious, because they were exactly right and Cygnus Black had always hated being wrong. She signed it with her full name, Andromeda Cassiopeia Black Tonks, the black name, all of it. The weight of it and the history of it and everything she'd been trying to distance herself from since she married Ted, and everything Tonks had decided to use it for in a garden in Surrey 6 weeks ago, she sealed it. She sent it in the morning. Chapter 5, The Azkaban Letter. The petition landed on the desk of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement on a Tuesday morning, and caused, by Wednesday afternoon, the specific kind of institutional panic that happens when a bureaucracy is confronted with something it has been successfully ignoring and can no longer ignore. Andromeda knew this because Ogden sent her a note. Not an official one, a personal note, slipped under her door the way the anonymous letter about Harry had been slipped, the informant's method, the note that says I am telling you this as a person, not as an office. It said, they're discussing it at the senior level, Crouch is involved, expect resistance but expect movement. The argument is sound and they know it. Bartemius Crouch Sr., head of magical law enforcement, was a man who had prosecuted Death Eaters after Voldemort's fall with the kind of thoroughness that had made him briefly the most popular man in the ministry, and then slowly the most feared one, as it became apparent that his thoroughness was not entirely distinguishable from ruthlessness. He had sent people to Azkaban. He had sent people to Azkaban without trials, because the war had been terrible and the infrastructure of justice had been strained past its limits, and Crouch had made calculations the way all powerful men make calculations, quickly, with conviction and without sufficient accounting for the possibility of error. Sirius Black had been one of those calculations. Now Andromeda's petition was on his desk and the error was no longer abstract. She filed 2 supplementary documents on Thursday, a formal request for access to the original arrest record on Friday, and spent Saturday morning at the kitchen table with Harry going through the precedents for wrongful imprisonment petitions while Tonks did something complicated with a piece of parchment that she claimed was a map of Azkaban but was mostly a drawing of a fortress on a rock with dramatic waves around it. How long can they delay? Harry asked. He was cross-legged on his chair, the way he sat when he was deep in something, chin down, eyes moving steadily through the documents she'd put in front of him. Officially 30 days to respond to a formal petition, Andromeda said. Unofficially, they'll respond faster than that because the petition has already been registered with the Wisengamot Oversight Committee, which means Marchbanks is watching the clock. And if they say no, then we appeal to the Wisengamot directly and argue the petition in full session, Andromeda said, which they'd like to avoid because a full session means public record and public record means reporters. Harry nodded. He turned a page. He stopped at a line and read it twice, which was the tell twice meant he'd found something. It says here that a secondary guardian under an active kin claim has the right to written contact with the primary guardian with Tonks without ministry interception. He looked up. Has anyone told Sirius that Tonks claimed me? Andromeda looked at him. Then she looked at her own folder and turned to the page she'd been working from and found, with a slight hollow feeling, that she had not addressed this. She had been so focused on the legal architecture of the petition that she had not considered the simpler, more human thing, that there was a man in a cell who did not know that anything had changed. No, she said. Harry held her gaze. Not accusatory, he was never accusatory, but clear. He's been in there for 4 years, he said, and the first thing that changes is going to come from a letter. It should be the right letter. Tonks looked up from her fortress drawing. She'd been listening with the particular quality of attention she deployed when she was letting other people think and waiting to see where they landed. Can I write it? She said. Andromeda looked at her daughter. You want to write to Sirius Black? He's my cousin, Tonks said. Second cousin technically, and Harry's godfather and the secondary guardian. She set her quill down. Someone should tell him that things are different now that he has people. She paused. I'm good at that, telling people they have people. You are, Harry said quietly in the tone of personal experience. Andromeda was quiet for a moment, looking at her daughter. Then she pulled a fresh piece of parchment from the stack and slid it across the table. Write the letter, she said. I'll check it before it goes, but yes, you should write it. Tonks picked up her quill with the focused energy of someone about to do something important. She wrote at the top, Dear Sirius. Then she stopped and chewed the end of the quill. What's wrong? Harry asked. I'm trying to figure out where to start, Tonks said, because there's a lot and I don't want it to feel like a list of facts, like reading a ministry document. Start with who you are, Harry said. Then tell him about me, then tell him things are different. Tonks looked at him. You're good at this. You taught me, Harry said. You didn't start with explaining things when you met me. You started with telling me your name. Tonks absorbed this. Then she looked back at the parchment and began to write, and she wrote with the same focused, unhurried attention she brought to things she cared about, and she did not show it to Harry or Andromeda until she was done, which took 40 minutes. The letter, when Andromeda read it, was the best thing her daughter had ever produced. It was not long. It was clear and warm and direct, and it told Sirius Black 4 things in simple order: who Tonks was, who Harry was, what the claim meant, and that there were people working on getting him out. It ended with, I know you've been in there a long time and I know it's probably terrible, but things have changed now and you're not alone. Harry says to tell you that you have people. He's right, you do. Andromeda checked it, changed nothing, and sent it with the most reliable owl in Oxford. The owl reached Azkaban on a Thursday evening, which meant it had flown through the North Sea in autumn and arrived looking like something that had made a series of regrettable decisions. But it arrived, and the guard who brought Sirius's mail, such as it was, which was never, looked at the letter from an Oxford owl with an expression of genuine bewilderment and slid it under the cell door. Sirius had been lying on the narrow cot staring at the ceiling with the practiced vacancy of a man who has found that thinking hurts less if you do it sideways. If you approach thoughts from the oblique rather than head-on, the way you look at something bright, you look near it, not at it. He'd been doing this for 4 years. He was not entirely intact, but he was not broken either, and the difference was the animagus. When it got very bad, he became the dog, and the dog was simpler, and simpler meant the Dementors couldn't find as much to work with. The letter slid under the door and he sat up. He stared at it for a moment. He could not remember the last time he'd received a letter. He genuinely could not remember it, which told him something about how the time had been going. He picked it up, opened it, read it. He read it 3 times. The thread that had pulled taut in his chest 6 weeks ago, the thing he'd felt but couldn't identify, the thing he'd been turning over every day since, cautious about it, not wanting to make it mean something it didn't, pulled taut again, and this time it had a shape. It had a name. It had a small girl's handwriting that sloped to the right and dotted her eyes with small circles, and it had, You have people. He sat on the edge of his cot for a long time. Then he pulled the only piece of parchment he'd been allocated, 1 per month, for good behavior, a designation which in Azkaban meant simply has not attempted escape, and he wrote back. His handwriting was not what it had been. 4 years of cold and damp and irregular nutrition had taken something from the fine motor control. But he wrote, and what he wrote was, Tonks, I know your mum. She was the only decent one other than Regulus at the very end. Tell her I said so. Tell Harry his father was the best person I ever knew, and I am sorry it took this long for someone to tell him he has people. I knew James would have a son worth knowing. I should have done more. I didn't, I know that. I'm going to fix it. How do I help from in here? The letter arrived back in Oxford in 4 days, carried by the same battered owl who had clearly developed a personal investment in this correspondence. Harry was the one who collected the post. He'd started doing it 3 weeks ago, not because anyone asked him to, but because he liked the ritual of it, the morning walk to the door, the cool air, the sense of the day being officially started. He brought the letter into the kitchen and turned it over and looked at the handwriting on the outside and the Azkaban postal mark and stood very still in the kitchen doorway. Tonks appeared behind him. Is that from him? Yes, Harry said. Are you going to open it? A pause. It's addressed to you. Open it, Tonks said. He wrote it for both of us. Harry opened it. He read it standing in the kitchen doorway with the morning light coming over his shoulder, and Tonks stood behind him and read over his shoulder, and the kitchen was very quiet. When he finished, he folded it carefully and set it on the table. He pressed one hand flat on it, the way he pressed hands on things when he was making sure they were real. He said, My dad was the best person he ever knew, Harry said. Yeah, Tonks said. He knew my parents. Yeah, Harry was quiet for a moment. Something was happening in his face that was not quite grief and not quite joy, and was the specific complicated feeling that arrives when you receive evidence of a life that existed before you were old enough to know it. We have to get him out, he said. We're working on it, Andromeda said from behind them. She had come downstairs in time to hear the last exchange, and she read the letter where it lay flat under Harry's hand without picking it up. She read it and thought, how do I help from in here? She thought, that's Sirius, exactly, always asking what he could do, always needing to be in motion. She thought, hold on, write him back, she said to Tonks. Tell him to do one thing for now, one thing, and it's important. What? Tonks said. Tell him to hold on, Andromeda said. Tell him the petition is in and we're watching the clock, and the king claim means we have legal standing that we didn't have 6 weeks ago. Tell him the ministry cannot quietly ignore this anymore. She paused. Tell him we're coming. Tonks wrote the letter that afternoon. It was shorter than the first one. Hold on, we're coming, with a drawing of a sparrow at the bottom that was labeled Gerald, he supports you. Harry added one line at the end in his own handwriting, small and precise, I want to meet you. Harry, they sent it with Gerald, who had apparently decided this was his purpose now. The response from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement arrived in the 3rd week of October, which was 19 days after the petition, which was 11 days ahead of the official 30-day deadline. Andromeda took this as confirmation of Ogden's assessment. They were rattled enough to respond fast. which meant they were not secure in their position. The response was a refusal, but it was a specific kind of refusal, not a flat denial but a procedural one, citing the need for further review of the original arrest documentation, which documentation they claimed was incomplete. Andromeda read this and felt something very close to satisfaction, because a procedural denial was not a legal denial, and a request for documentation was an acknowledgement that documentation existed and should be examined, which was exactly the door she needed to open. She filed a formal request to the Wisengamot Oversight Committee the same day. Marchbanks convened a preliminary review within the week. Andromeda attended, presented the petition's key arguments in 30 minutes, and watched Crouch's representative, a tight-faced young man named Weatherby who had the energy of someone who had been given a very uncomfortable assignment, attempt to maintain the procedural objection against arguments that had been specifically constructed to dismantle procedural objections. He couldn't. Marchbanks ordered the original arrest documentation produced within 14 days. Andromeda walked out of that meeting and went straight home and found Harry and Tonks in the back garden under the oak tree, and the afternoon was cold now, properly cold, and they were both in coats and had apparently been conducting some kind of experiment involving leaves and a moderate amount of concentrated intent. "What are you doing?" she said. "Harry's been practicing intent," Tonks said. "Watch." Harry was sitting cross-legged under the oak with a pile of autumn leaves in front of him. He looked at one leaf. He held it in his gaze with the quality of attention he brought to things, and the leaf rose. Not with a wand, not with a word, just with the directed, precise focus of a person who had understood the principle of intent at a fundamental level and had been quietly practicing it every day for 2 months. The leaf rose to eye level and stopped. Harry's expression was very focused, very still, the look of someone not straining but concentrating, holding a state of precise clarity. Then he moved it sideways, foot by foot, controlled, deliberate, and set it down on a different spot. He looked up at Andromeda. "Marchbanks," he said. "She ordered the documentation," Andromeda said. Something lit up in Harry's face, bright and clean. Not the wild delight of the broom, but something steadier and in some ways more satisfying, the specific pleasure of watching a long process yield results. "Good," he said. "That leaf was 3 feet, Tonks said to Andromeda. "He started at 6 inches 2 months ago." "I know," Andromeda said. "I've been watching." Harry looked at the leaf, then at his hands. "Can we do wand work soon?" Andromeda had been expecting this question and had been thinking about the answer for weeks. The official line was that children under 11 didn't do wand work. They waited for Hogwarts, they waited for formal instruction, they waited for the sanctioned structure of magical education. The official line was also constructed for the average child, not for a child who could move objects with directed intent at age 5 and had an intuitive grasp of magical theory that would not embarrass a third year. "Not wands," she said. "Not yet. Wands amplify, and your control isn't ready for amplification, not because you lack control, but because your range of emotion is still expanding, and amplification before that's settled creates instability." She sat down on the garden bench, and they both turned to face her with the attentiveness of children who understood that she was about to say something real. "But we can start on something adjacent, focus work. The kind of intentional magic that builds the internal architecture that wands then work with. The structure you build with practice," Harry said, half to himself, "like learning the grammar before you write the sentences." "Exactly like that," Andromeda said. "I want to do that," Tonks said immediately. "You've been doing it already," Andromeda said. "Both of you, the leaf work is focus work. The metamorph magus control exercises we've been doing every morning, that's focus work." She looked at them. "What I want to add is something harder, deliberate emotional regulation, not suppression. I don't mean suppress feelings. I mean the ability to feel something fully and still direct your magic with precision. That's what an aura does. It's what any serious magical practitioner does." Tonks chewed her lip. "Because if you're scared and you can't regulate it, your magic does scared things. Or angry things," Harry said. He said it matter-of-factly, from experience, the same way he referred to the Dursleys, not with visible pain but with the casual noting of someone who has processed a thing and filed it. "My magic did angry things a lot at the Dursleys." "Protective things," Andromeda said. "Your magic protected you, but yes, channeled and directed, it becomes something you choose rather than something that happens to you." Harry nodded slowly. Then he looked at the leaf he'd moved and back at Andromeda. "Can we start today?" Andromeda looked at the two of them in the cold afternoon under the oak, her daughter with her coat on the wrong buttons and her hair cycling through colors as her mood moved, and Harry cross-legged in the dead leaves with his chin up and his green eyes direct and his mind always 3 steps ahead. "Yes," she said. "We can start today." They worked until it got dark. Andromeda taught them the first focus technique she'd been taught by her own mother. Before everything went wrong with the family, a breathing practice, simple on the surface, that was actually about learning to feel the space between a feeling and a response. You felt the feeling, you identified it, you held it for 3 counts, and in those 3 counts you made a choice about what to do with the magic that wanted to follow it. Tonks found the waiting hard. She was built for immediacy, for following impulse, and the 3-count pause felt like being asked to hold a sneeze. She kept breaking it, which produced small comic eruptions of accidental magic, a brief shower of purple sparks, a momentary change of the garden stones to something that looked disturbingly like cheese, and she found this funny, which helped because laughing at herself reset the cycle. Harry found the waiting easy. This was, Andromeda reflected, both a good and a concerning thing that he had spent 5 years learning to pause before he responded, to make himself smaller and quieter and more contained, and that capacity was real and useful and also built on a foundation she'd rather he hadn't needed. She watched him do the three-count pause and she watched it work, watched his magic stay perfectly still while he counted, and she thought, we are going to have to work eventually on letting it out. On the emotional range side of the balance, the containment he'd already learned, the release was the work to come, but that was later. For now, the technique, the 3 counts, the choice. By the time Ted called them in for dinner, Harry could hold the pause for 7 counts and Tonks could hold it for 4, and both of them had the specific tired satisfaction of people who have worked at something real and felt it begin to yield. Gerald was in his customary windowsill position when they came in. He had a small piece of parchment tied to his leg that none of them had tied there, which was confusing until Tonks examined it and found it was a note from Sirius, a second letter, shorter than the first, that Gerald had apparently retrieved on his last trip north. It said, I can do things from here, I have an idea. Can you tell Andromeda to send me a specific piece of documentation, the original Order of the Phoenix membership records if she can access them? There's something in my arrest that nobody ever looked at properly. As B. Andromeda read this at the dinner table, she read it twice, then she looked at the note with the particular focus of someone who has just been handed a piece they didn't know was missing from a puzzle. What is it? Harry asked. He's found something, Andromeda said. In his own case, he's been thinking about it. She looked up. 4 years in a cell with nothing to do and he's been going over it. What did he find? Tonks said. I don't know yet, Andromeda said, but if Sirius Black says there's something nobody looked at, I believe him. He was an Auror. He knows what evidence is supposed to look like. She set the note down. I'll find the Order records. Are they hard to get? Harry asked. They're not Ministry property, Andromeda said. The Order was private. Dumbledore kept the records. She was quiet for a moment, then she looked at Ted. You're going to write to Dumbledore, Ted said. Yes, she said. Is that all right? Andromeda thought about the letters she'd exchanged with Dumbledore over the past months, careful, increasingly honest, the correspondence of 2 people in the process of rebuilding something that had been damaged. She thought about his letter saying, I owe Harry more than a conversation. She thought about old men who could acknowledge mistakes. I think so, she said. Yes. She wrote to Dumbledore that night. She was direct. Sirius has asked for the original Order membership records. He believes there's something in the evidence around his arrest that wasn't properly examined. I need those records for the Wisengamot Oversight Review. I am asking for your help. She sent it. She went to bed. At 2 in the morning, an owl arrived that was not Gerald. This one was Dumbledore's, an enormous tawny bird that had been flying since about 10 p.m. by the look of it. It carried a response, brief and clear. The records are yours. I have had them copied and the copies are on their way. I hope Sirius is right. I have spent 4 years believing I knew what happened. I am increasingly aware that certainty is not the same as accuracy. 80 The copies arrived the next day, delivered by 2 separate owls because the documentation was substantial. Andromeda spread it across the kitchen table and she and Harry went through it together while Tonks coordinated, pulling relevant pages and organizing by date with the focused energy of someone who has found a system and is committed to it. It took 3 hours to find what Sirius had found from memory. Harry found it, actually. He had been going through the arrest documentation, the original paperwork such as it was, the hasty scrawl of an Auror department dealing with catastrophe in the aftermath of Voldemort's fall, and he stopped, and he read a page twice and he held it up. This says the scene was assessed by 2 Aurors, Harry said, and they noted 12 Muggles dead and damage consistent with a single dark spell. Yes, Andromeda said, but it also says Sirius was the only one present at the scene when they arrived. Harry looked at the page. How does one person cast a spell that comes from one direction if the Muggles were killed in multiple directions? The damage assessment shows marks from at least 3 different angles. He set the page down. Someone else was there. Andromeda looked at the page. She looked at Harry. Then she looked at Tonks, who was looking at Harry, and in Tonks's face was the expression she wore when Harry did something that confirmed something she'd already understood about him. Peter Pettigrew, Andromeda said slowly. She'd read the name in the case files, the other name, the one who died supposedly, the one whose finger they'd found. The assumption was that Sirius killed him, but if someone else was there, Sirius didn't kill anyone, Harry said. Did he? It wasn't quite a question. Andromeda looked at him, at the certainty in his face, not the certainty of someone guessing but of someone who has read the evidence and reached the only logical conclusion the evidence supports. I don't know, she said honestly. Not yet, but this, she tapped the page. This is exactly what Sirius saw from memory. He knew the evidence didn't add up. She stood. I need to add this to the Wisengamot submission. Tonight, Tonks said. Tonight, Andromeda said. She worked until 3 in the morning. Harry fell asleep at the kitchen table at 11:30, cheek on his folded arms, the Auror documentation still spread around him. And Tonks brought a blanket from upstairs and put it over him with the matter-of-fact tenderness of someone who does caring things without making a performance of them. Andromeda looked at him sleeping in the kitchen, surrounded by documents about his godfather's wrongful imprisonment, and thought about what kind of person falls asleep still in the fight, still at the table, still holding the thread. She thought James would have done exactly this. She thought Lily would have been the one to spot the inconsistency in the damage assessment. She thought Harry James Potter, 5 years old, figured out in 3 hours what the Ministry missed for 4 years. She turned back to her work. In the morning, she had 42 additional pages for the Wisengamot submission. The new section was titled, simply and precisely, Evidentiary Inconsistencies in the Original Arrest Record of Sirius Orion Black. It was, she thought, the strongest thing she'd written yet. She sent it with a note to Marchbanks. The case is not what it appeared to be. There was a second person at the scene. We believe we know who. Please review the attached before the documentation deadline. Then she made breakfast. Harry woke up when the kettle went on and looked around for a moment with the disorientation of someone who'd fallen asleep somewhere unexpected, found the blanket, looked at Tonks across the table and said nothing, just touched the edge of the blanket briefly. Then he folded it neatly and put it on the counter and sat down. Did you finish? He said. Yes, Andromeda said. Is it good? It's very good, she said. Harry nodded. Good, he said and reached for the cereal, and Gerald arrived on the windowsill with the punctuality of a bird who has decided mealtimes are his concern. And the kitchen was warm and the morning was early and somewhere in the North Sea a man in a cell was holding on. The thread between Harry and his godfather pulled taut and held. They were coming. Chapter 6, Narcissa's move. The letter from Narcissa came on a Friday, 3 weeks after Lucius had mentioned she wanted a meeting, and it was nothing like Lucius's letters. Where his were brief and controlled and precise, Narcissa's was longer, more careful, and written in a hand so elegant it looked like calligraphy, the kind of writing that takes years to develop and that people from certain families learn because it is expected of them before they learn anything else. She proposed tea. Saturday afternoon, the Malfoy townhouse in Kensington. Just herself, she wrote. Lucius would be occupied elsewhere. She gave her word on this, which from a black meant something because black words, when given formally, were binding in a way that ordinary promises weren't. It was one of the house's older customs, one that even Narcissa observed even now, even married into another name. Andromeda read the letter twice and then gave it to Ted. She's going alone, Ted said. She says she is. Do you believe her? Andromeda thought about Narcissa, her youngest sister, the one she'd been closest to before everything went wrong, the one who had married Lucius Malfoy at 19 with the particular expression of someone who has been told what they're going to do and has decided to do it with full commitment and not look back. She thought about Narcissa at family gatherings, the composed face, the careful eyes that missed nothing, the love for Draco that was the one uncalculated thing about her. Yes, she said, I believe she's going alone. I'm less certain about why. And you're going? I think I have to. She folded the letter. I need to know what she wants. Right now she's an unknown variable and I don't like unknown variables. Harry stays here, Ted said, obviously, and Tonks. Andromeda looked at her husband. Tonks is coming with me. Ted absorbed this. He was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet when he was thinking something through completely before he said it. Because Narcissa needs to understand the full reality of what has happened, Andromeda said. Not the legal abstraction, not the political implications, the actual reality, which is a girl who looked at a boy and decided he was hers to protect and used the House of Black's oldest magic to make it permanent. She paused. Narcissa respects power, but she respects real things more than most people know. Ted nodded slowly. Okay, he said. But if anything feels wrong, we leave, Andromeda said, immediately and without ceremony. I'll take Harry to the tube, Ted said. He wants to see the engineering museum again anyway. He's been 3 times, Andromeda said. The man at the front desk knows his name now, Ted said. I think they're friends. Harry appeared in the kitchen doorway in the manner of someone who had been listening from the hall and had decided to acknowledge himself rather than remain technically invisible, which Andromeda had noticed he did sometimes. He announced himself rather than eavesdropped, even when eavesdropping would have been easy. It was a specific kind of integrity, the kind that didn't require an audience. I heard Narcissa Malfoy, he said. Yes, Andromeda said. I'm meeting her tomorrow. Without me, he said. Not as an objection, just confirming. Yes, he nodded. What do you think she wants? Information, probably, Andromeda said, or an arrangement. She'll frame it as concern. Is she dangerous? She's the cleverest of the 3 of us, Andromeda said, meaning herself, Bellatrix Narcissa, which is saying something, but she's not Bellatrix. She doesn't enjoy the damage. Harry looked at the letter on the table. Ask her about Pettigrew, he said. Andromeda went still. She was in those circles, Harry said. The Death Eater circles, even if she wasn't officially one, she might know things about what actually happened that night. He met Andromeda's eyes steadily. It can't hurt to ask. Andromeda looked at her ward, this 5-year-old who had been in her house for 4 months now, who had arrived hollow-eyed from a cupboard under stairs and was now standing in her kitchen in the morning suggesting tactical approaches to intelligence gathering. She looked at him and thought, not for the first time, this child is going to either save everything or terrify everyone, and I suspect both. I'll ask, she said. The Malfoy townhouse in Kensington was white-fronted and severe, the kind of London house that announced wealth through understatement, no ostentation, just proportion and quality, and the quiet confidence of a building that knows it doesn't need to try. Andromeda and Tonks arrived at 2 in the afternoon. Andromeda was in dark gray robes. Tonks was in the dark brown hair again, which she maintained now for 4 months with the discipline of someone who understood that some situations required tactical camouflage. The door was opened by a house elf who blinked at them with enormous eyes and led them silently through a hall that was all pale marble and restrained art. Nothing dark, nothing ostentatious, but everything expensive in the way of people who have never needed to think about cost. Into a sitting room with a fireplace and 2 chairs and a low table, and the chairs were already occupied. Narcissa was sitting in the one nearest the window. She looked, as she always had, like someone had sculpted her specifically to be a black, the pale hair, the fine bones, the quality of stillness that the family seemed to produce in its members like a signature. She was wearing light blue robes and she had her hands folded in her lap, and she looked at Andromeda when she came in with the particular expression of someone who's feeling something significant and has decided not to perform it. Andromeda, she said. Narcissa, Andromeda said, a pause the length of a decade in a single breath. Then Narcissa looked at Tonks and something happened in her face, something small and genuine, the kind of thing that gets through the composure before the composure can stop it. You must be Nymphadora, she said. Tonks, Tonks said pleasantly. Narcissa absorbed this. Of course, she said and almost smiled. Sit down, please. They sat. The house elf produced tea with the efficient invisibility of long practice and then disappeared. The fire burned. Outside the window, Kensington went about its Saturday business, pedestrians and pigeons in the ordinary texture of a London afternoon. Lucius doesn't know the full content of this meeting, Narcissa said. She said it simply without preamble, the way people state things they've decided to be honest about. He knows I'm meeting you. He doesn't know what I intend to say. All right, Andromeda said. Narcissa looked at her tea, then at Andromeda. How is the boy? He's well, Andromeda said. I read the confirmation record, Narcissa said. From the Wisengamot hearing, the arguments you made, the section about the House of Black's magic having never agreed with bad decisions. A pause. That was well put. It was also true, Narcissa said, and there was something complicated in her voice. I've been thinking about that since the hearing. She was quiet for a moment, and the quality of her quiet was different from the composed silence she usually deployed. This was a thinking quiet, real and slightly uncomfortable. The family has not used the old magic well in a long time. The king claims. She stopped, started again. When Lucius told me what had happened, I thought he was wrong about the details. That there had been a mistake in the registration. The king claim hasn't been used since 1871. I know, Andromeda said. Then the magic accepted it, Narcissa said, and I stopped thinking there was a mistake. She looked at Tonks directly. How did it feel when it happened? Tonks considered this question with the seriousness it apparently deserved. Like something that was already true was just being said out loud, she said. Narcissa looked at her for a long moment. Yes, she said quietly, that's what old magic feels like. She looked back at her tea. Draco is 4, he's going to be 5 in June. She stopped again, and this time the stop was longer, and what came through the composure was something unambiguous, a mother, just a mother with a specific fear. He's going to grow up in a world where the Dark Lord is gone but not gone, where the people who served him are waiting. Where my husband, another stop, sharp this time, like she'd touched something hot. I need Draco to not grow up the way we grew up. Andromeda kept very still. I'm not asking you for anything political, Narcissa said. I'm not here as Lucius's representative or to negotiate about the Wisengamot or to discuss the Malfoy position on anything. I'm telling you this because you are my sister and you got out. The word out landed with weight that suggested she'd been carrying it for a long time. You married Ted Tonks and you got out of all of it, and your daughter claimed a Potter boy with the house's oldest magic and made it mean something different. She looked at Andromeda steadily, the composure fully present now but being used for something honest rather than something defensive. I want to know how you did it, how you decided to leave. The sitting room was very quiet. The fire made a sound, and the clock on the mantel made a sound, and Tonks had gone very still in her chair with the quality of stillness she produced when she felt something large happening around her and was making herself small to let it happen. Andromeda put down her tea. She looked at Narcissa, at this woman who was her sister, who had always been the most privately intelligent of the three of them and had chosen to deploy that intelligence in service of a world that had never deserved it, and she thought about what to say and then decided to just say the true thing. I fell in love with someone the family wouldn't accept, she said, and I had to decide whether the family or Ted was real, and Ted was real and the family was a performance. She held Narcissa's gaze. I'm not telling you to leave Lucius. I don't know your marriage and I'm not going to pretend I do, but if what you want is Draco to have a different life, then the question isn't what you leave, it's what you build. Narcissa was quiet. Something was moving behind her eyes. Lucius will not change, she said. I know, Andromeda said. He has too much of himself invested in the way things were. I know that too, but Draco doesn't have to be. Narcissa stopped, looked at her hands. Then in a different voice, quieter, could I bring him to meet Harry someday when it's appropriate? Andromeda looked at her sister for a long moment. She thought about Harry, who read grimoires for the tactical advantage, who fell asleep at the table still holding the thread of the fight. She thought about Draco Malfoy, who she didn't know at all, who was 4 years old and had a father like Lucius and a mother like the woman sitting across from her, and what that meant for who he might become. Someday, Andromeda said. Yes. Narcissa's shoulders dropped a fraction, and it was the most unguarded thing Andromeda had seen from her in 20 years. Now, Andromeda said, and her voice shifted slightly, still warm but acquiring the quality of a different kind of conversation. I want to ask you something, not as a sister, as someone with a legal process running. Narcissa looked at her steadily. About Sirius. About Peter Pettigrew, Andromeda said. A silence different from the previous ones, sharper. Narcissa's hands, which had relaxed slightly, folded back together, not defensively, the gesture of someone organizing themselves for something difficult. What about him? Narcissa said. He was there that night, Andromeda said. At the scene, we believe he was there and that the evidence was misread or ignored in the chaos after Voldemort fell. We believe Sirius did not commit the murders he was imprisoned for. Narcissa was looking at the fire. She had been looking at it since Andromeda said Peter Pettigrew with the focused attention of someone managing a complicated internal process. Pettigrew was a rat, she said, not an insult, a statement of fact, the specific kind of flat fact that carries its own history. Andromeda registered this. Was he an animagus? A very long pause. He was, Narcissa said, still watching the fire. I heard this second hand from people at gatherings in those years. He was mentioned as a curiosity, a minor Death Eater who could become a rat. It was considered amusing, I think, by the people who found those things amusing. She looked at Andromeda. I never met him personally, he was not significant enough for that, but I heard his name in that context, in the context of his animagus form more than once. Would you say that? Andromeda said quietly, in writing under oath, not at a full trial, at the preliminary review. It's the kind of corroborating detail that. Yes, Narcissa said. The word came out clean and immediate, and it surprised them both, she could see that. Narcissa looked slightly surprised by herself, as if the decision had been made below the level of deliberation and had come up fully formed. Lucius will be, he won't be pleased, she said. No, Andromeda agreed. But Sirius was never whatever the family became, whatever Bellatrix became, Sirius was never that. She pressed her lips together briefly. He was the one who got out before you did, really. The family hated him for it, but he was right to get out. A pause. And Pettigrew was the people who spoke his name in those circles didn't respect him, they used him. He was useful and he was small and he served the Dark Lord and then he disappeared and everyone assumed Sirius had killed him and nobody, she stopped. Nobody asked why a Death Eater who had survived the Dark Lord's fall would be convenient to have declared dead. The fire crackled. Tonks had her head tilted very slightly, her brown hair catching the firelight, her eyes moving between them. The sparrow comprehension in her face, she was hearing things people didn't usually say out loud in rooms like this one. Write it down, Andromeda said. Whatever you just told me, write it as a formal statement, have it witnessed, and send it to me. She leaned forward slightly. Narcissa, this could change everything for Sirius. It's the piece we need to show the Wisengamot that the evidence wasn't just incomplete, it was actively misleading. Narcissa looked at her sister across the low table with the tea going cold between them. She looked for a long moment, the composed face doing its work, the intelligent eyes moving through consequences and calculations in the rapid internal way that Andromeda recognized from their childhood, the same calculation both of them had done their entire lives about what was safe to say and what was safe to know. Then she said, I'll have it sent by Monday. Thank you, Andromeda said. Narcissa looked at Tonks. How old are you? 5, Tonks said. 6 in November. And you used the kin claim, Narcissa said, not incredulous, more like a person confirming something they're still processing. The oldest black working, the one that requires genuine recognition, the one that hasn't activated in over 100 years. You invoked it at 5. The magic agreed with me, Tonks said simply. Narcissa looked at her for a moment. Then something happened on her face that was absolutely, completely, genuinely a smile, brief, real, the smile of someone who has been surprised by something that turned out to be good. Your father's name is Ted Tonks, she said, and you are the most black person I have met in a decade. Tonks absorbed this with the mild interest of someone receiving information. Because of the magic, because of the certainty, Narcissa said, blacks are certain. We're wrong about what we're certain about half the time. But the certainty itself, the conviction that when something is right, it's right and you act on it, she shook her head slightly. Yes, that's the house. Harry has it too, Tonks said. The certainty, he just points it at better things. Narcissa's expression shifted at the mention of Harry, something careful and interested. What is he like? Andromeda considered this, not the diplomatic version, not the careful version. He reads ancient grimoires and identifies legal remedies, she said. He found a critical evidentiary inconsistency in Sirius's arrest record that the entire ministry missed. He can move objects without a wand and he hasn't been at it 4 months. He named sparrows after meeting them for 20 minutes. She paused. He's extraordinary and he doesn't know it yet, which is the part that breaks your heart. Narcissa was quiet for a moment. Dumbledore knew what he was going to be, she said. Dumbledore was trying to protect him, Andromeda said. The protection was real, the method was wrong. There's a difference between keeping someone safe and keeping someone small, Narcissa said. Yes, Andromeda said, there is. They looked at each other, the two of them, sisters across a decade of distance and a decade of wrong choices in a sitting room in Kensington on a cold November afternoon. And the fire was the only warm thing in the room except for this specific, complicated, unperformed thing that was still between them, still real, the thing that had been there before the family taught them what they were supposed to be. I want Draco to know him, Narcissa said again, quieter. Not for any strategic reason. I want my son to grow up knowing that the black name can be used for something other than what I've watched it be used for. Bring him in the spring, Andromeda said. When the petition is further along and things are less in motion, bring him and let them meet. Narcissa nodded once. She reached for her tea, found it cold, set it down, the gesture of a person concluding a meeting. I'll send the statement Monday, she said. Everything I know about Pettigrew's animagus form. They stood. The house elf appeared with their coats. At the door in the marble hall with the pale winter light coming through the fanlight, Narcissa looked at Tonks one more time. Nymphadora, she said. Tonks said cheerfully, the almost smile again. Do you know what the kin claim means for you personally? Narcissa said. Not just the legal structure, what it means, what you've taken on. It means he's mine to look after, Tonks said. It means more than that, Narcissa said. Under black law, the primary claimer is bound to the claimed. What hurts him you feel, what threatens him you'll move toward instead of away from, not by choice, by the magic. It becomes instinct. She looked at this 5-year-old girl with the dark brown hair and the steady eyes. That's a very large thing for a very young person, Tonks thought about this. Really thought about it in the way she thought about things that deserved to be taken seriously. Then she shrugged one shoulder easy. I was going to do that anyway, she said. The magic just agreed with me. Narcissa stood in her marble hall and looked at her niece, and she was technically her niece, second cousin or not, connected by the black blood and the black magic that had decided to do something different, and for a moment something showed in her face that had nothing to do with Lucius or the Wisengamot or political calculations, something entirely private. Yes, she said. I suppose it did. They left. On the walk to the tube, Tonks was quiet for 3 streets, which was long for her. Then she said, she's sad. Yes, Andromeda said. Not because of Sirius or the petition or anything like that, Tonks said. Just underneath, she's sad. She made choices that closed doors, Andromeda said, and she's smart enough to see the doors. Can we keep writing to her after everything's sorted? Andromeda walked for a moment. The Oxford Street crowd moved around them and the cold pressed in and the sky was the specific gray of a London November, the gray that suggests winter has arrived and made itself comfortable. Yes, she said. I think we can, Tonks nodded, satisfied. The brown hair shifted briefly to something warmer before she caught it. Gerald is going to need more trips to Azkaban, she said, returning to logistics with the easy naturalness of someone who processes feelings by moving toward the next practical thing. We need to tell Sirius about Narcissa's statement. We do, Andromeda said, and we should tell Harry how the meeting went. Yes, he'll want to know about Pettigrew, Tonks said. He'll probably have 3 questions written down by the time we get home. Andromeda almost smiled. He'll have 5, she said. He had 6. They were written on a piece of paper in Harry's neat small hand, numbered carefully, and he handed it to Andromeda the moment she came through the door without preamble or pretense, because that was how Harry communicated about things he'd been waiting on directly, the anxiety channeled into preparation rather than performance. She read them. She answered 4 immediately. The 5th, did she seem like she was telling the truth about Pettigrew? She said yes, she seemed completely honest, and she told him why. The 6th question she read last and held for a moment before looking at him. The 6th question said, did she say anything about what Voldemort was doing now, where he is? Andromeda looked at Harry, at the green eyes steady and direct behind the repaired glasses, at the face that was 5 years old and had already learned to think about things that most adults spent their energy not thinking about. She didn't, Andromeda said. Not directly, but she said the people who served him are waiting, Andromeda said, which means he's not gone. Harry nodded. He had already known this, she could tell, had read it somewhere, had reasoned it out, had already incorporated it into the picture he was building. We should be ready, he said. We should, Andromeda agreed. When Sirius gets out, Harry said, he'll know more. He was an Auror. He'll know things about how Voldemort worked, what his strategies were. Yes, Andromeda said. Good, Harry said, and folded the piece of paper and put it in his pocket with the neat finality of someone crossing items off a list. Then he looked at Andromeda and said in a completely different tone, smaller and more careful, was there anything about my parents? Andromeda sat down at the kitchen table. She looked at him. She said your father was the best person Sirius ever knew, she said, which was from Sirius's letter and true. And she said Sirius was the one who got out of the black family first before me, and she implied that the people in those circles respected power and courage above everything else, and your parents had both. Harry was quiet for a moment. He had his hands flat on the table, the posture he assumed when he was receiving something and processing it, not letting it go anywhere until he'd looked at it properly. Good, he said quietly. That's good. Ted put a plate of biscuits on the table between them, and the kitchen was warm, and Gerald was on the windowsill looking politically engaged. And Tonks dropped into her chair and immediately launched into a detailed reconstruction of the meeting for Ted with her characteristic narrative enthusiasm, including impressions of Narcissa that were surprisingly accurate for someone who had met her once, and the evening settled into the ordinary rhythm of the house. Under the table, Harry still had his hands flat on his legs, still processing. Andromeda caught his eye across the table briefly, and he looked back at her and she gave him the small nod that said, I see you, you're doing well, keep going. He nodded back once, then reached for a biscuit, and the conversation moved on. Narcissa's statement arrived on Monday as promised. It was 4 pages, formal, witnessed by a Wisengamot-registered solicitor, and it contained everything she'd said plus 3 additional details. Andromeda hadn't asked for dates of occasions where Pettigrew's animagus form had been referenced in Death Eater-adjacent contexts, a name of a second witness who might corroborate, and a final line that Andromeda read twice. I make this statement of my own free will and without coercion. I make it because what was done to Sirius Black was wrong, and the House of Black does not benefit from injustice carried in its name. Narcissa Malfoy née Black. Andromeda added it to the Wisengamot submission. She labeled it Exhibit F, corroborating statement Narcissa Malfoy. Then she wrote to Marchbanks, we are ready to proceed to full review. We have everything we need. Chapter 7, The Break. The Wisengamot full review was scheduled for the 3rd Thursday of January, which gave Andromeda 6 weeks to prepare, and the Ministry 6 weeks to get increasingly uncomfortable. She could measure the discomfort by the volume and frequency of correspondence from Crouch's office. First a letter requesting additional time, which she declined, then a letter suggesting the preliminary findings were insufficient for a full session, which she refuted with 7 pages of statute, Then a third letter that was so procedurally convoluted it barely made grammatical sense, which she read once and filed under desperation. Ogden's informal notes continued to arrive, slipped under the door in the small hours, the correspondence of a civil servant who had decided his conscience had an opinion and was acting on it at personal risk. They told her things like, Crouch has spoken to Fudge twice this week, the minister is worried about optics, and Weatherby has been reassigned, new representative being briefed, and once 3 days before Christmas there's a name coming up in internal discussions, Peter Pettigrew. Someone in the department remembered something. That last one she brought to the kitchen table on a Sunday morning and read to Harry and Tonks over breakfast, because she had started doing that, reading them the things that mattered, keeping them current, treating them as participants rather than bystanders. Harry needed this, she'd understood. He functioned better when he knew the state of the board. Not because he was anxious, he was the least anxious 5-year-old she'd encountered, but because ignorance made him feel like the cupboard, like something being managed, and she was not going to make him feel like the cupboard. Harry read the note. His eyes went through it twice, which meant something had snagged. Someone in the department remembered something, he said. Yes. They've known this whole time, he said. Someone has. Andromeda was quiet. Not Crouch specifically, Harry said, thinking aloud in the careful, lateral way he did when he was working something out. He sent people to Azkaban without trials, that was his method. There were others, we read about it, so he wasn't specifically hiding Sirius, he just never questioned his own methods. He set the note down. But someone lower down, someone who processed the original case file and noticed the inconsistency and decided it wasn't their problem. Probably, Andromeda said, and now that there's official attention, they're deciding it is their problem. People do that, Ted said from behind his newspaper. They wait for it to be safe to be right. Harry absorbed this. It was clear he found it frustrating, not in a hot way, more in the way of someone cataloging a human tendency and finding it disappointing. He looked at Tonks, who was eating toast with the full-body commitment she brought to meals and had been listening to all of this with her customary listening face, which looked like inattention but wasn't. Good, Tonks said. If someone in the department is talking, Marchbanks will hear it before Thursday. She'll already have heard it, Andromeda said. Marchbanks hears everything. Then we're in good shape, Tonks said, with the cheerful confidence of someone who has decided the outcome and is working backwards from there. Christmas came and went in the particular way of houses where children live, noisily, generously, with the slight controlled chaos of too many good things happening at once. Ted had bought a tree and Harry had helped decorate it with the focused enthusiasm of someone doing this for the first time, placing each ornament with deliberate care, standing back to assess, adjusting. Tonks had enchanted the fairy lights to cycle through colors, which they did with an exuberance that occasionally outran the spell's precision and produced colors that didn't have names. Andromeda had given Harry a book about magical theory, a proper one, graduate level, the kind used in Auror training, and he'd opened it and gone very still for a moment and then looked up at her with the unguarded expression he still only occasionally let through. This is the real one, he said, not the introductory version. You finished the introductory version in 6 weeks, she said. You've been ready for the real one for 2 months. He held it carefully, the way he held things that were specifically, genuinely his. Thank you, he said, and the thank you was real in the way that made it mean more than the word. Tonks gave him a broom. A real one, not the training model, but a proper child's broom. A clean sweep too that she'd convinced Ted to acquire with the argument that the training broom's governors were limiting his development, which was technically an argument about physics and actually an argument about giving Harry something that didn't treat him like someone who needed to be restricted. Harry had looked at it for a full 5 seconds before saying anything. We're doing altitude this afternoon, he said. Obviously, Tonks said, they were on the broom for 3 hours. The clean sweep 2 had a proper speed range, and Harry climbed it within 15 minutes of being on it, not recklessly, but with the calm, progressive testing of someone who understands machinery, checking what it could do in ordered stages. By the end of the afternoon, he was doing things with a broom that Andromeda was fairly certain most 12-year-olds couldn't do, and he'd landed every time with the precise, unhurried confidence of someone who has never experienced the ground as a threat. Gerald watched from the fence with the dignified approval of a bird who takes aviation seriously. The January review came on a gray Thursday morning with frost on the windows and Harry at the kitchen table at 6 a.m. when Andromeda came down, already dressed, already reading, the Auror theory book open beside the grimoire beside Narcissa's statement, the light from the kitchen spilling warm onto the cold street outside. You should sleep more, Andromeda said. I slept enough, he said, which was probably true for him specifically and would not have been true for anyone else his age. She sat down and had tea and they went over the key points together, not because she needed to, she knew them cold, but because it helped him to go through it and it helped her to see the structure through his eyes, which had a way of finding the load-bearing points without being told where they were. At 7:30 Tonks came down with her hair gold and her coat already on. Ready, she said, Gerald's coming. Gerald is not coming to a Wisengamot hearing, Andromeda said. He's morally supportive. He's a bird, he's our bird, Tonks said firmly, and the matter was considered settled. Gerald stayed home. Ted drove them to London and dropped them at the ministry entrance and said to Andromeda, as he always said before the important things, You've got this, with the complete conviction of a man who has never once doubted his wife's competence, and she kissed him once and got out of the car. The chamber was fuller than the confirmation hearing. Word had gone out in the way things get out in the wizarding world, quietly, through channels, through the specific gravity of a story that people sensed was significant. The public gallery was at capacity. Andromeda spotted Ogden near the back, which surprised her, and 3 other ministry officials she recognized from the Ancient Law Division, and 2 reporters whose presence she acknowledged mentally and filed under useful. Lucius was in the gallery again. Today he had Narcissa beside him. Andromeda caught Narcissa's eye across the chamber. Narcissa gave her the fractional nod that constituted a greeting between people who understand each other precisely. Then she looked forward, composed, and nothing in her face suggested that she had sent 4 pages of sworn testimony that were currently in Andromeda's folder under Exhibit F. Lucius, beside her, was also looking forward. His expression was the usual composed pleasantness, but Andromeda had been reading Lucius Malfoy for 20 years and she could see the thing underneath it. The thing he was containing, not anger, not quite, something more precise. The expression of a chess player who has seen a move coming and has not yet decided how to respond. Marchbanks called the session. Andromeda presented. She had presented arguments before, in the confirmation hearing, in the preliminary review, and a dozen smaller filings, but this was different. This was the full submission, everything she had, built over 7 months of meticulous work, and she presented it the way she had been trained from childhood to do things that mattered, with total clarity, no wasted motion, and the specific quality of certainty that doesn't need to perform itself. The evidentiary inconsistencies. Narcissa's statement about Pettigrew's animagus form. The corroborating witness Narcissa had named a retired Auror named Moody's former colleague who had been tracked down and had provided a secondary confirmation. The original arrest record with Harry's annotations, she had transferred his observations into formal legal language, but the logic was entirely his. The statute establishing that imprisonment without trial was illegal regardless of wartime context. The argument that if Pettigrew had staged his own death, he was potentially still alive, which meant the assumed victims weren't and the assumed perpetrator wasn't. Crouch's representative, the new one, a careful, senior-looking woman named Hopkirk, tried 3 separate challenges. Andromeda met all 3. The second one she'd anticipated so specifically that she had the counter-argument written on a dedicated page in the folder, which she produced and read from directly, and the effect in the chamber was of someone pulling a rug from under an argument that had barely gotten started. The third challenge was the interesting one. Hopkirk argued that even if the evidence was inconsistent, the appropriate response was a new investigation, not an immediate release. That releasing Sirius Black before a full investigation was complete created public safety risks given his alleged involvement with Voldemort. Andromeda let her finish. Then she said, the legal standard for continued imprisonment is not investigation pending. The legal standard is conviction following trial. Sirius Black has had neither. He has been held for 4 years and 1 month without either. The appropriate response is not a new investigation that he sits in Azkaban waiting for. The appropriate response is immediate release into recognizance while any investigation proceeds, as per Section 4 of the Wrongful Imprisonment Statutes, which I believe everyone in this chamber has now read. The chamber was quiet in the way of people who have heard an argument close like a box. Marchbanks looked at the full Wisengamot. We'll deliberate, she said. The deliberation took 40 minutes, which was 40 minutes of Andromeda and Tonks sitting in the anteroom outside the chamber, and Andromeda drinking the tea that an usher had brought, and Tonks sitting on the floor against the wall with her knees up and her hair doing something complex and cycling and her eyes on the ceiling. What if they say no? Tonks said, not anxiously, just asking the question because it existed and she didn't believe in pretending questions didn't exist. Then we appeal to a higher court, Andromeda said. There is no higher court within the British wizarding system, so we go to the International Confederation of Wizards and file a human rights complaint, which would be significantly more embarrassing for the ministry than releasing 1 man. You've planned for that. I've planned for 6 outcomes, Andromeda said. This is the best one. Number 3 is the most complicated. Tonks thought about this. What's number 2? They confirm release but attach conditions so restrictive they're functionally equivalent to house arrest, Andromeda said, which we then challenge. It's slower but still workable. What's number 6? Number 6 isn't going to happen, Andromeda said. Mum, it involves Fudge personally overriding the Wisengamot, which is legally impossible, Andromeda said. I included it for completeness. Tonks nodded. She looked at the ceiling. He's been in there 4 years and 1 month, she said. Yes, that's almost as long as Harry was at the Dursleys. Andromeda looked at her daughter, at the connection she'd just drawn simply and directly between 2 people she cared about and 2 kinds of confinement that had been imposed without justification. Yes, she said, it is. I think about that sometimes, Tonks said, when we send the letters. What it's like to be in a place and not be able to leave. She was quiet for a moment. Harry doesn't talk about the cupboard. No, Andromeda said, but I can feel that he thinks about it, Tonks said. Sometimes when a room feels very small he goes still in a particular way. She looked at Andromeda. I think getting Sirius out I think it's part of the same thing for him, fixing enclosed spaces, making sure people who shouldn't be trapped aren't trapped. Andromeda was quiet for a long moment, looking at her daughter on the floor of the ministry anteroom. This 6-year-old girl, she was 6 now, had been 6 since November, who felt people's emotions like a physical texture and used it not to manipulate but to understand. You're right, she said. Yes, okay, Tonks said. Good, then it's going to work. The door opened and the usher appeared. The vote was 51-11. Marchbanks signed the release order herself, which was unusual. The chief warlock didn't typically sign individual release orders, that was administrative work, but she signed this one in front of the full chamber with the specific deliberateness of someone making a statement about what the act meant. She dated it, sealed it, and handed it to Andromeda directly. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement will be notified within the hour, Marchbanks said. Transport from Azkaban will be arranged for tomorrow morning. Thank you, Andromeda said. The Kin-Claim submission and the evidentiary work on the arrest record, Marchbanks said, looking at her over her spectacles, represent the most thorough legal work I have seen brought before this body in 30 years. A pause. Your daughter found the boy. Yes, Andromeda said, and the boy found the inconsistency in the arrest record. Yes, he's 5, Marchbanks said. He turned 6 in July, Andromeda said. Marchbanks looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone making a note in a very long mental file. Then she went back to her bench and Andromeda walked out of the chamber with the release order in her folder and Tonks beside her, and for the first time since this whole thing had started, she did not immediately start planning the next step. She stopped in the corridor, she breathed. Tonks took her hand, said nothing. Just held it the way children hold hands when they understand that something has been accomplished and words are unnecessary. Then Tonks said, "Can we tell Harry?" They apparated from the ministry entrance, which Andromeda didn't usually do with Tonks. She normally used the car or the tube, because apparition with a child required the child to consent to the splinching risk, and Tonks typically had opinions about this. But today Tonks said yes, fine, go, before Andromeda had finished the question, and they landed in the front garden of the Oxford house in a soft implosion of displaced air. The front door opened before they reached it. Harry was there and Ted behind him, and Harry was reading their faces with the rapid accuracy he'd always had. He could read faces the way he read documents, thoroughly and fast, and he saw what was there before Andromeda said a word. His face did the thing it did when something large was real. The expression that started as neutrality and then opened slowly like a door that had been closed a long time being opened carefully to see if the room beyond was what you hoped. Tomorrow morning, Andromeda said. Harry stood in the doorway in his gray jumper and his proper glasses and his jeans that fit, and behind him the house was warm and the kettle was already going and Gerald was on the windowsill in the hall looking alert, and Harry nodded once and said, "Good." Then he said, "Can I write him a letter tonight so it's there when so he has it when he arrives?" "Yes," Andromeda said. He wrote it that night alone at the kitchen table after dinner. Andromeda saw the light on from the landing at 10 o'clock and came down and found him still there, the letter in front of him, a single page, read and reread in the way of someone making sure each word was exactly right. "Finished," she said. "I think so," he said. He looked at it. "I don't know what to say to someone I've never met who knew my parents." "What did you say?" "I told him about Gerald," Harry said, "and about the broom. And that Tonks claims him too, she just doesn't invoke ancient magic every time." He paused. "And I said that I've been reading about what Aurors do and that I think we should work together when he gets out, that I want to hear about my mum and dad from someone who actually knew them." "That's good," Andromeda said. "I said he didn't have to if it was too hard," Harry said. "Talking about them, I said there was no rush." He looked at the letter. "I didn't want him to feel obligated." Andromeda looked at this boy 6 years old who had written a letter to his traumatized godfather he'd never met and had thought to include both the invitation and the exit clause, who had thought about what Sirius might need as carefully as he thought about everything. She sat down. "He's going to love you," she said. "You should know that before tomorrow." Harry looked at her. "You think so?" "He loved your father more than anyone," she said. "And you think like James and feel like Lily, and you're already something James and Lily would have been so proud of that it would have embarrassed you to see it." She held his gaze. "He's going to love you the moment he meets you." Harry looked at the letter. Something moved through his face, something real and enormous and young. Then he folded the letter carefully and sealed it and set it on the table. "Okay," he said quietly. "Good." Sirius Black arrived at the Tonks house at 10:30 the following morning. Andromeda had gone to collect him. She'd insisted on being the one, had taken the ministry transport to the Azkaban arrival point and met him there. But she had not prepared herself properly for the sight of him, because she had been thinking of Sirius as the legal problem, as the file, as the petition and the exhibits and the 51-11 vote. And she had not been thinking about Sirius, the person walking out of a building in January light after 4 years and 1 month of gray sea and cold and dementors. He was thinner than she remembered, of course he was. The gray in his hair was there, not much, not devastatingly, but there. He was 30 years old and had the look of someone who had been 30 for slightly longer than the number implied. But his eyes were the same. The black eyes, deep and dark and sharp, the family eyes, and in them the thing she'd been afraid might have been extinguished by Azkaban. He was there. He was present. The Dementors had done their work. There was no question. She could see the weight of it on him, but they hadn't finished the job because Sirius was too stubborn for the Dementors to finish the job. He looked at her and said, "You look the same." "You look terrible," she said. "Thanks," he said. "I've been ill for 4 years." Something like that. He looked around at the ordinary Muggle arrival point, the car park, the gray January sky. He breathed in like someone testing whether outside air still worked. "Did you really do it?" "Read the file," she said. "It's yours." He took the folder. He didn't read it there. He held it and looked at it, and she watched him process the fact of it, the physical fact of paper in his hands that said release order and had Marchbanks's signature, and the processing took a long time, longer than reading it would have, because it was not a document he was processing but a reality. Harry, he said. He's at the house, she said. He's been up since 6. Sirius looked at her. For the first time, something crossed his face that was entirely unguarded, the composure of a man who has survived by controlling what shows entirely absent for a moment. I failed him, he said. I should have before Azkaban, I should have. Sirius, Andromeda said. There will be time for all of that. Today is not the day for it. When today, she said, you meet your godson, that's all, everything else is later. He looked at her. Then he nodded once, the same deliberate nod she saw in Harry when he accepted a piece of logic. She brought the car because apparition with someone who had just been released from Azkaban seemed unkind. The drive took 2.5 hours with the motorway traffic, and Sirius spent most of it looking out the window at the world going by, at the motorway and the signs and the service stations and the countryside, and occasionally asking questions. How long had Harry been here? What was he like? What had they told him about his parents? What was the Kin-Claim's current legal status? What was the status of the Pettigrew investigation? By the time they reached Oxford, he knew most of the essential facts because Andromeda answered every question directly and completely, and he listened the way an Auror listens, quietly retaining everything, occasionally asking the question one step past the obvious. You used black family law against the ministry, he said at a set of traffic lights. My daughter used it first, Andromeda said. Right, Sirius said. The Kin-Claim, he'd read Tonks's letters many times, she knew, had practically memorized them. She's 6, she was 5 when she claimed him. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Mad, he said with genuine admiration. She would take that as a compliment. Good, it is one. The car pulled up in front of the Oxford house. Sirius looked at it from the passenger seat, at the green door, the bay window, the brick. The ordinary London commuter house that had become in 7 months something else entirely. Okay, he said to himself. He wrote you a letter, Andromeda said. It's inside. Sirius got out of the car. The front door opened before he reached it because the house knew apparently the stairs had creaked in a specific pattern at 10:15, and the kettle had put itself on early, and Gerald had been agitated in his windowsill since 9, and Harry was there. He was wearing his gray jumper and his proper glasses, and he was standing in the doorway of the house that had learned his name, and he looked at Sirius with the look he used when he was reading something important and wanted to read it right. Sirius looked at him. And the thing Andromeda had told Harry the night before, he's going to love you the moment he meets you. She watched it happen in real time, watched Sirius Black see Harry Potter for the first time and see James in the hair and Lily in the eyes and something entirely new in the expression, something that was specifically and only Harry, and she watched Sirius's careful, controlled, survival-built composure simply stop functioning. He crouched down to Harry's level. His voice, when he found it, was unsteady in the way of things that are too large to carry easily. Hey, he said. Hey, Harry said. I'm serious. I know. Harry looked at him steadily. Are you okay? And Sirius, who had survived 4 years of Azkaban and Dementors and the Grey Sea and the Long Nothing and had come out the other side through sheer pig-headed refusal to break, heard a 6-year-old ask him if he was okay with complete and genuine directness and no agenda, and he laughed. It came out slightly fractured, slightly rough, not a clean laugh, but real, utterly, helplessly real. No, he said, not really, not yet. He looked at Harry. Getting there. Harry nodded. Good, he said. There's tea and Gerald wants to meet you. Who's Gerald? Come in, Harry said, and I'll explain. He stepped back and let Sirius in, and the house made a sound for him on the threshold, not the stairs yet, but something, a subtle shift of the air, a warmth, the house extending itself in the way it had extended itself to Harry, which Andromeda had not expected and which felt somehow exactly right. Sirius stepped inside. Tonks was in the kitchen doorway with her hair gold and her arms crossed, and her expression the one she wore when she decided something and was waiting to have the decision confirmed by events. She looked at Sirius with her direct, comprehensive look. You're my second cousin, she said. You're the one who claimed Harry, Sirius said. Yeah, nicely done, Sirius said. Tonks unfolded her arms. Come have tea, she said. We have a lot to tell you. They sat at the kitchen table, all of them, Andromeda and Ted and Harry and Tonks and Sirius and Gerald on the windowsill, and the tea was hot and the house was warm and the kitchen was full of voices, and Sirius held the letter Harry had written him and read it at the table without making any effort to do it privately because there was nothing in it he needed to hide. He read the part about Gerald. He looked at the sparrow who looked back with dignity. He read the part about the broom. He looked at Harry. Clean sweep too? Yes, Harry said. I've been working on altitude. Altitude's not the challenge, Sirius said. Turns at speed are the challenge. I know, Harry said. I've been working on those too. Sirius held the letter for a moment longer. He got to the last part, the part about the Auror work, the offer to work together, the invitation and the exit clause. He read it twice. When he looked up, his expression was the unguarded one, the one without any performance in it. Mum, he said, would have put in the exit clause. Yeah, Harry said. Your dad would have just assumed you wanted to hear everything immediately. A pause. He was usually right. Harry looked at this, turned it over, filed it. Tell me, he said, not urgently, not pushing, just the offer extended, the same exit clause in reverse. When you're ready, I'm here. Sirius looked at him for a moment. Then he said quietly, James used to do this thing with his broom when he was nervous before a match. He'd do exactly 1 lap of the pitch at full speed, just one, then he was fine. He shook his head slightly every single match like he needed to remind himself his body knew what it was doing. Harry was completely still listening, the whole quality of his attention given to this. He had your same eyes, Sirius said. Lily's eyes, they were, he always said they were his favorite thing, Lily's eyes. He stopped, looked at the table. Your mum used to correct everyone's logic out loud, he said. Mid-conversation while you were talking, she'd just quietly note the flaw, didn't make a thing of it, just that's not quite right, here's why. James found this intensely attractive, which tells you everything. He almost smiled. Harry hadn't moved. She was the best witch in their year, Sirius said. By a significant distance, she knew it, she didn't say it, she just was. At the other end of the table, Andromeda looked at Ted. Ted put his arm around her. The kitchen was warm and the afternoon light was coming in, and Sirius Black was sitting at their table telling Harry Potter about his parents for the first time, in a voice that was rough and a little broken but entirely, completely honest. And Harry was listening the way he'd been listening since the day he arrived, with everything he had, taking it all in, building the picture piece by piece. Gerald ruffled his feathers on the windowsill. Tonks leaned over to Harry and said very quietly in the voice she used when she was saying something true, I told you. Harry looked at her. He didn't ask what she meant because he knew what she meant. He just looked at her with the open, unguarded expression, the one that had been taking longer and longer to appear but came more easily now, the expression that said, yes, you were right, he had people, he had always been going to have people. The magic had just agreed with her first. Chapter 8, What Black Means. Now spring came to Oxford the way it always did, tentatively at first, testing the temperature, then all at once, the way decisions come after long deliberation. The cherry tree on the street outside the Tonks house put out blossoms in March that Tonks declared politically significant and Harry declared structurally interesting, and the argument about this lasted 3 days and was still technically ongoing in April. Sirius had been with them for 2 months. He'd moved into the spare room on the second floor, which the house had quietly rearranged itself for. The ceiling had done something that resulted in more light, and the wall near the window had produced a shelf that hadn't been there before, which Sirius had regarded for a full minute before deciding to put his books on it and not ask questions. He slept badly for the first 3 weeks. Andromeda knew because the kitchen light was on at 2 and 3 and 4 in the mornings when she came down, and Sirius would be at the table with tea and a book or just tea and nothing, doing the oblique approach thing with his thoughts that he'd developed in Azkaban. She didn't ask him about it. She made tea and sat with him sometimes, or she left him to it, reading which one the situation required and acting accordingly. By the 4th week he was sleeping until 6. By the 6th week, occasionally until 7. Harry noticed all of this. He didn't comment on it, but he noticed and he adjusted. He'd taken to leaving a mug out in the kitchen before he went to bed, and Ted had started doing it too, and then Tonks, and the effect was that when Sirius came down at 3 in the morning, there was always a mug waiting on the counter with the particular warmth of something left deliberately, and the kettle put itself on, and the house made its quiet sounds. You all do that, Sirius said to Harry one morning in February with the tone of someone who has only recently understood something. The mug, yeah, Harry said, you don't have to. I know, Harry said, that's why we do it. Sirius looked at him, then he looked at his tea. Then he looked out the window at the winter street, and he did the thing he'd started doing around week 3, where he let something real show on his face instead of managing it down immediately, the specific quality of a man who is relearning that things can be good without being taken back. Right, he said. By March he was running with Harry in the mornings. This had started because Sirius needed to rebuild physical condition. 4 years of inadequate nutrition and no exercise had done things to the body that required systematic work to address, and Sirius approached this with the grimly competitive energy of a man who finds being weak personally offensive. And Harry had started joining him because Harry woke up early and had energy, and the morning runs became their time. They went through the Oxford streets in the pale early light and didn't always talk, but when they did it was about the things that morning runs are for, direct, no-performance conversation, the kind that happens when you're moving and there's no eye contact. Sirius told him things about his parents in pieces, the way you share something that is large and precious by handing it over carefully rather than all at once. A detail here, a story there. James at 16, spectacularly awful at potions and completely unconcerned about it. Lily's laugh, she'd had a laugh apparently that was completely disproportionate to her composure, the kind of laugh that took over a room and that she found slightly embarrassing and could not stop. James and Sirius on their first animagus attempt, which had resulted in Sirius being partially a dog for 6 hours in a way that was apparently neither dignified nor comfortable. Partially, Harry said. The ears came first, Sirius said, and then they just stayed for 6 hours. Moony nearly died laughing. Moony, Remus Lupin, he was our friend. Sirius paused the way he paused when something was complicated. We haven't been in contact after everything. He was quiet for half a block. I'd like to fix that when things are settled. We should find him, Harry said in the way he said things that had been decided. Yeah, Sirius said, we should. The Pettigrew investigation had been officially opened by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement in February. Not because they'd chosen to, but because Marchbanks had compelled it, citing the evidentiary submission from the Wisengamot Review. Crouch had been removed from the case's oversight, citing conflict of interest, a removal he had not contested, which Andromeda took as a sign that he understood his position was precarious and was choosing to not make it worse. The investigator assigned was a witch named Amelia Bones, who had a reputation for thorough, impartial work and the specific quality of someone who had been in the ministry long enough to know how it operated, and to have personal feelings about how it operated that she kept professionally contained, but that occasionally showed at the edges. She had contacted Andromeda directly within her first week on the case, asked 3 specific, intelligent questions about the evidentiary submission, and then sent a note that said only, "This should have been investigated in 1981. I intend to do it properly." Andromeda liked her immediately. Bones had found things. The investigation was ongoing, not concluded, but she'd found things, traces of pedigree and records that had been overlooked. A pattern of behavior in the months before the Potter's death that, viewed with the frame of this man as feeding information to Voldemort, read entirely differently than it had when viewed through the frame of this man died heroically. She'd found a witness who had seen Pettigrew in the area of Godric's Hollow in the days before the attack. She'd found financial records suggesting Pettigrew had resources in the last year of Voldemort's reign that did not match his income. She had not found Pettigrew himself. "He's a rat," Tonks said at the kitchen table, reviewing the latest update from Bones with the comprehensive attention she brought to cases now. She had taken to calling it the investigation with proprietary energy, as though it were a project she was personally managing, which it somewhat was. Literally, he's hiding as a rat somewhere. "Somewhere a rat would go unnoticed," Harry said. "Everywhere," Ted said. "Rats go unnoticed everywhere. That's the thing about rats." "Somewhere he has access to information," Harry said, "or protection. He was a Death Eater. He served Voldemort. He didn't do that because he was brave. He did it because Voldemort was the winning side and Pettigrew picks winning sides." He looked at the table. "Voldemort isn't gone. He's diminished, but somewhere, Pettigrew would be near whatever's left of that." Sirius had gone very still across the table. He did this sometimes in these conversations, not with upset but with the specific stillness of someone who is listening and recognizing and confirming. "He was always a follower," Sirius said. "He needed someone to follow, and Voldemort's followers," he paused, "even after the fall, some of them maintained things, networks, resources, places. Pettigrew would have gone to ground in something like that." "So we tell Bones," Harry said. "She probably already knows," Andromeda said. "We tell her anyway," Harry said. "Our reasoning, our framework. She might have the same conclusion from a different direction, and the intersection tells you something." Sirius looked at Harry across the table. He had this look he developed over the past 2 months, a look of someone perpetually encountering something they had been told about and are still surprised by in practice. "You're 6, he said. "You've said that before," Harry said. "It keeps being surprising. The thinking doesn't feel different to me," Harry said. "That's the most alarming part," Sirius said, but he was smiling when he said it, the real smile, the one he'd had before Azkaban and was slowly recovering. It was 3 weeks after this conversation that Lucius Malfoy came to the house. He did not send a letter. He appeared on a Thursday afternoon in late March with his silver-topped cane and his composed pleasantness, and knocked on the green door with the manner of someone who arrives in good faith and wants this understood immediately. Harry opened the door because Harry was closest and answered the door on reflex, and he looked at Lucius Malfoy for the first time, at the white blonde hair and the tall composed figure and the silver cane, and he did not step back. He stood in the doorway with the unhurried steadiness that was entirely characteristic and said, "Hello." Lucius looked at him, at this boy who had been the subject of 7 months of legal and political maneuvering, who stood in a doorway in Oxford in a grey jumper with the complete absence of intimidation. "You must be Harry," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "You're Lucius Malfoy." "I am." "Andromeda said you'd come eventually," Harry said. He stepped back from the door. "Come in." Andromeda appeared from the study with the expression of someone who has calculated a high probability of something and is now watching it arrive on schedule. Sirius appeared from the kitchen with a mug in his hand and an expression that was not friendly and not hostile, but was the very careful neutral of a man in the presence of someone who had done him no direct wrong but whose alliances had done considerable wrong to people he loved. Lucius took in the house. The warm, ordinary kitchen smell, the books on the hall table, Gerald on the windowsill regarding him with the alert suspicion of a bird with opinions. He took in Sirius, and this was the first time they'd been in the same room since before Azkaban, and something passed between them, a look, complicated and long, the look of 2 people who know each other's history better than they'd like. "Sirius," Lucius said. "Lucius," Sirius said. The look concluded without incident. Lucius looked at Andromeda. "I'd like to speak with you," he said, and with a pause brief, a calculation visible in it, "all of you, if that's appropriate." "Sit down," Andromeda said. They sat in the sitting room, the whole household, because this was how the Tonks house handled significant conversations together. No one managed off to another room. Ted sat in his chair by the window. Tonks sat on the floor, her back against the sofa, her hair an even, deliberate brown. Sirius sat on the sofa's arm with his mug. Andromeda sat in the armchair across from Lucius. Harry sat on the sofa proper, cross-legged, looking at Lucius with the reading look. Lucius looked around the room. At this assembly, the muggle-born schoolteacher, the released Azkaban prisoner, the metamorphmagus child, the claimed boy, and something crossed his face that he did not quite manage to conceal, not distaste, something more complicated, the expression of a man confronting the fact that his categories don't contain what he's looking at. "The Pettigrew investigation," he said. "Ongoing," Andromeda said. "Bones is thorough," Lucius said. "I know her reputation. She will find him if he is findable." A pause. "When she does, the implications for people who were," he chose the next word with care, "adjacent to Voldemort's operations will be significant." Because if Pettigrew was the spy, Andromeda said, then the information he passed came from the Order, and the Order's membership list becomes relevant. And other question marks get reopened. Lucius said nothing. He was looking at his cane resting across his knees, the silver top catching the afternoon light. You're worried about what the investigation uncovers, Harry said. Lucius looked at him. The look lasted slightly longer than the others had. I'm concerned, Lucius said with the careful precision of a man who chooses his words like tiles, placing each one level, about the stability of arrangements that have been in place since the end of the war. Certain understandings, certain acknowledged realities. You're worried your name comes up, Sirius said flatly. I'm worried, Lucius said, and his voice had dropped the pleasantness, now gone to something more direct and less performed, that the investigation will be used as a vehicle for revisiting things that were settled and will not serve anyone by being unsettled. Some things that were settled, Andromeda said, were settled wrongly. Yes, Lucius said, Sirius. He looked at his own hands. This was, Andromeda recognized, an unusual thing for Lucius Malfoy to do. He was a man who held eye contact as a tool, who used it strategically. Looking at his hands was something else. Sirius being imprisoned was a wrong outcome. I did not cause it, but I did not question it. I am aware of this. The sitting room was very quiet. Why are you here, Lucius? Andromeda said. He was quiet for a moment. Then Narcissa told me about her conversation with you, he said. In January, she told me more than she told me at the time. He looked up. She told me she gave you a statement about Pettigrew. She did, Andromeda said. It's in the Wisengamot record. I know, a pause. I was not pleased. The admission had the quality of something that had cost him. She told me that I could be displeased if I needed to be, but that she would do it again because it was right. He looked at Andromeda. I have not heard Narcissa say that to me in some years. That something was right and she would do it. His jaw set briefly. I did not argue with her. That was wise, Andromeda said. Yes, he looked at Harry. You met Draco at Easter. He's all right, Harry said. He liked you, Lucius said, and the words had a quality that suggested they had been processed several times before being said. He came home and talked about you for 3 days. A pause. He said you showed him how to move things without a wand. He picked it up fast, Harry said. He's got good instincts. Lucius looked at his son being described by a boy he'd spent 7 months attempting to strategically manage, and the expression on his face was the most unguarded thing Andromeda had seen from him in 20 years of knowing him. What do you want? Andromeda said, the same question she'd asked him in the Wisengamot chamber 8 months ago. This time the answer took longer. Lucius was quiet for a full 10 seconds, which was, for him, the equivalent of a lengthy deliberation. I want to not be on the wrong side of this, he said. Whatever is coming, he said it looking at Harry. There are people who believe the Dark Lord will return. I have reason to take this seriously. And there are, he paused, objects, artifacts, things that were entrusted to certain people in certain years, that would be better addressed now proactively than later in circumstances with fewer options. The room was very still. Are you telling me, Andromeda said carefully, that there are Voldemort artifacts in circulation and you know where some of them are? I am telling you, Lucius said, that a person who wished to address such things proactively would benefit from an understanding with someone who has demonstrated they know how to work the legal system to achieve outcomes. He looked at her steadily. And who has a reason to want those outcomes? You want a deal, Sirius said. I want it not be my family's worst outcome, Lucius said. It came out raw, briefly, too direct for what he was trying to be, and Andromeda saw him feel it happen and choose not to retrieve it. He let it sit there. Narcissa wants Draco to have a different life. She is right about this. I have been thinking that she is right about this for longer than I've admitted. He looked at Harry again. The king claim changed the calculation, not because it was legal pressure, though it was. Because the House of Black's oldest magic looked at a muggle-raised orphan half-blood and said yes. And if that is what the oldest magic of the most conservative ancient house in Britain says, then the world I have been maintaining in my head, the order of things, he stopped. It is not accurate. Harry was looking at Lucius with the reading look, steady and thorough. Then he said, if you know where Voldemort artifacts are, you should tell Dumbledore. Lucius looked at him sharply. He's the best equipped person to deal with them, Harry said. He's been fighting Voldemort longer than anyone. If there are things that could allow Voldemort to come back, Dumbledore needs to know that's the right thing. He paused. Not a deal, the right thing. The silence was very specific. It was the silence of a room of people watching a 6-year-old decline a strategic arrangement in favor of the correct action, and it was the silence of Lucius Malfoy having this pointed out to him by the subject of his strategic arrangements. Lucius looked at Harry for a long time. You sound like Lily Potter, he said. Good, Harry said. Something settled in Lucius Malfoy's face. Not capitulation, it was too precise for that. The specific settling of a man who has been holding a position and has decided to put it down. He turned to Andromeda. I'll speak to Dumbledore, he said, this week. I'll arrange it, Andromeda said. Not a deal, Lucius said, and there was something in how he said it, something almost like someone trying the words on and finding that they fit differently than expected. The right thing. Yes, Andromeda said. He left shortly after, and the sitting room rearranged itself around his absence, Ted exhaling slowly, Tonks's hair going immediately gold, Sirius turning his mug in his hands with an expression of someone who has witnessed something that didn't go the way he expected. Was that real? Sirius said. Parts of it, Andromeda said. The parts about Narcissa and Draco were real. The artifacts, he's calculating survival odds and choosing accordingly. But sometimes the right calculation leads to the right action and the reason matters less than the result. He called you Lily Potter, Tonks said to Harry. He was talking about how I sound, Harry said. I know, I just thought it was good. Harry looked at her. Yeah, he said, it was. The letter from Dumbledore came 2 days later, which meant the old man had already heard from Lucius, which meant Lucius had moved faster than expected, which Andromeda took as confirmation that whatever he knew about the artifacts was significant enough to motivate speed. The letter was the longest Dumbledore had written to her. It covered 3 pages and it was different in quality from his previous letters, more direct, less composed, the handwriting the same but the sentences shorter, the admission in it more openly stated. He wrote, Lucius has told me about an item that should never have been allowed to persist. I believe I know what it is and I believe I have been remiss in not seeking it out earlier. I must also tell you something that I have been deciding whether to tell you for some months, and have concluded that you deserve to know it. There is a prophecy. It concerns Harry. It was made before he was born, and it is the reason I placed him where I placed him, a choice which, as you have made clear and as I now understand more fully, was made with good intentions and insufficient imagination. I would like to meet with Harry. Not to impose anything on him, not to instruct him, not to tell him what he is or what he must do. Simply to tell him the truth about what exists and why. He has the right to know. He has, I think, had the right to know for some time, and I have been waiting for a moment that felt appropriate. I'm not sure such a moment exists. Perhaps one simply chooses a moment and makes it appropriate by being honest in it. I should have been a better guardian of the truth. I am trying to do better. Andromeda read this at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning with Harry across from her and Sirius next to him and Tonks eating toast. She read it and then she set it down and looked at Harry. There's a prophecy, she said, about you. Dumbledore wants to tell you about it. Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at the letter without reading it. I thought there might be something like that, he said. You thought, Sirius started. It explains too much, Harry said. Why Voldemort came after my parents specifically, why I survived, why Dumbledore was why he had so many plans around me. He looked at Andromeda. What does it say? He doesn't include the text in the letter, Andromeda said. He wants to tell you in person. Harry thought for a moment. His hands were flat on the table, the processing posture. Okay, he said, I'll meet him. But he looked at Andromeda and then at Sirius and then at Tonks. You all come. He doesn't tell me alone, he tells all of us. Agreed, Andromeda said immediately. Obviously, Tonks said. Sirius looked at the letter. He says he's trying to do better. He is, Andromeda said. I think he genuinely is. I believe that, Sirius said. I'm just noting it. He looked at Harry. He loved your parents. He failed them in certain ways and he's been failing you, but he loved them. That's real. Harry nodded. I know, he said. I've read his letters to Andromeda. You've read, Andromeda began. You leave them on the desk, Harry said neutrally, a brief pause. They're not private, Andromeda said. I know, Harry said. That's why I read them. Sirius made a sound that was almost a laugh. The meeting with Dumbledore happened on a Tuesday at the Tonks house, which Andromeda had specified and he'd accepted without condition. He came by flue, which the Tonks hearth accepted with a sound that suggested mild reservation, and he came out of the fireplace with his midnight blue robes and his half-moon spectacles and his extraordinary face, which had in it today less of the deliberate composure and more of something else. Harry met him in the sitting room with Andromeda on one side and Sirius on the other, and Tonks on the floor in her characteristic position. Dumbledore looked at Harry and Harry looked at Dumbledore, and there was a moment between them, longer than a moment, a real one, the kind of moment that has been waiting to happen and finally has. Hello, Harry, Dumbledore said. Hello, Harry said. I owe you a great deal, Dumbledore said. More than an apology, though, that's where I'll start. I placed you somewhere you weren't safe because I convinced myself it was necessary and didn't look closely enough at what safe actually required. He paused. I was wrong, I am sorry. Harry looked at him, the reading look thorough and careful. Okay, he said. Thank you, just okay, Sirius said. He said he was wrong and he's sorry, Harry said. What else should I say? Sirius opened his mouth and closed it. Andromeda pressed her lips together. What's the prophecy? Harry said to Dumbledore. Dumbledore sat down. Looked at the room, at all of them, this assembled household, and he said, I want to say something before I tell you, which is that a prophecy is not a sentence, it is not an instruction. It is a statement of a possible shape of things made by someone who saw a thread and followed it. You are not bound by it. Tell me, Harry said. Dumbledore told him. The prophecy of Trelawney in full for the first time in this sitting room in Oxford, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal. The room was very quiet while he spoke. Harry listened without expression, not the controlled neutral, something more than that, something that was actively processing in real time, the way high-capacity things process at speed. When Dumbledore finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, He marked me as his equal, the scar. Yes, Dumbledore said. Because he chose me, Harry said, not because the prophecy forced it. He heard part of it and made a choice, and the choice created the reality. Yes, Dumbledore said, that is exactly right, and it is the part I should have made clear from the beginning, that his choice is what gave the prophecy teeth. Without his choice, it might have amounted to nothing. Harry looked at the scar on his forehead, which he couldn't see but seemed to be considering from the inside, then he looked up. So the power I have that he doesn't know about, he said. What is it? I believe it is love, Dumbledore said. What your mother did, what Andromeda's daughter did, what this house is. He looked around the sitting room with the expression of a man encountering the reality of an idea he'd always theoretically held. It is not a soft thing. I have spent many years saying this and not entirely believing it. It is the hardest magic there is, the oldest, even older than the Black King claim. Your mother died for you and it left a mark that Voldemort's magic cannot pass. He looked at Tonks. Your guardian invoked a binding that has not moved in 114 years because she saw a child who needed a someone. That is the same thing, different shape, same root. Tonks was very still the way she was when something she felt was confirmed by an outside source. You're saying, Sirius said slowly, that the reason Harry is going to defeat Voldemort if it comes to that is not power. Is not the scar or the prophecy or ancient magic, it's that he has people. It's that he knows how to receive love, Dumbledore said quietly, and return it and act from it. He looked at Harry. Voldemort chose a child who he thought was equal to himself alone without protection marked by fate. He did not choose correctly. He chose a child who, as it turned out, was surrounded. He paused. He doesn't know that yet. When he returns, and I believe he will return, though not soon, he will not know the full reality of what he is facing. He'll find out, Harry said, not a threat, a statement. Yes, Dumbledore said, he will. The meeting went on for 2 more hours. Dumbledore answered every question anyone had directly, without management, without the careful withholding that had characterized his earlier dealings with this situation. He told them about Voldemort's method of seeking immortality, about the artifacts and what he suspected about them, about the form he believed Voldemort currently occupied and the conditions that might restore him. He told Sirius things Sirius had not known about the Order, about Pettigrew, about the choices made in the last days before the Potter's death. He told Harry about James and Lily in ways that only someone who had loved them could, specific memories, specific qualities, the truth of who they'd been rather than the myth that had been accreting around them in their absence. When he stood to leave, he looked at Andromeda. You should have been the one to take him in 1981, he said. I knew that and I let other considerations override it. I won't make that kind of error again. I know, Andromeda said. The artifact Lucius mentioned, Dumbledore said. I'm going to retrieve it this week. It shouldn't exist. None of them should. When I have more information, you'll tell us, Harry said, not a question. Dumbledore looked at him. I will tell you, he said, and meant it, and it was clear he meant it. He went into the fireplace. The Tonks hearth let him out with slightly more warmth than it had let him in. The sitting room settled back into itself after he left. Outside, the Oxford afternoon was doing its spring things, birds, the distant sound of the college bells, the cherry blossoms still going on the street tree. Gerald had relocated to the sitting room windowsill for the meeting and was now making his views known via the medium of feather ruffling. Well, Ted said. Yeah, Tonks said. Sirius was looking at Harry. How are you, he said, not are you okay, which was a closed question, how are you, which was open and real. Harry thought about this with genuine care, the way he always thought about genuine questions. I'm fine, he said. I think I already knew most of it in the rough shape. Having it be true doesn't change anything about right now. It changes what's coming, Sirius said. What's coming was always coming, Harry said. We just know more about it now. That's better, not worse. He looked around the room at Andromeda and Ted, at Sirius, at Tonks still on the floor with her gold hair and her steady eyes. His expression was the open one, the unguarded one, the one that had been coming more easily for months and was now simply characteristic. We have time, he said, and we know what we're dealing with, and we're together. He paused. That's more than enough to start with. Tonks reached up from the floor and punched him lightly on the knee, which was her affectionate gesture had been since the climbing frame in Surrey. He looked down at her. Obviously, she said. Obviously, he agreed. Later, when the house had gone quiet and Ted and Andromeda were in the kitchen and Sirius was doing something in the garden that involved standing very still in the last of the evening light and simply being outside, Harry and Tonks were in the back upstairs window, the one that looked over the Oxford rooftops toward the sky. Harry had his Auror training book open on the sill, but he wasn't reading it. He was looking at the sky the way he did when he was thinking about something large and was giving it the full space of looking at something bigger than the thought. Tonks, he said. Yeah, when we go to Hogwarts, he said, we'll be in different years. 2 years apart, she said. I'll be 3rd year when you start. I'll already know everything. You'll know everything from your perspective, Harry said, which is useful but not complete. Tonks looked at him. Are you correcting my logic right now? A little. Like your mom, Tonks said. Harry's mouth curved up. Apparently, a pause. I just mean it'll be different at Hogwarts. We'll be in different houses, probably different schedules. Harry, Tonks said. What? The king claim is permanent, she said. Hogwarts is a building. She looked at him direct and easy, the way she looked at everything she was certain about, which was most things. You are stuck with me. This is not a negotiable situation. Harry was quiet for a moment. The spring evening went about its business outside the window, swallows tracking the last light, the sound of the street below, the Tonks house warm behind them. I know, he said. Then stop working out whether we'll be okay, she said. We're always going to be okay, he looked at her. The green eyes behind the proper glasses, the boy who had been in a cupboard and was now on a windowsill in Oxford with his name in the Black family registry and a prophecy and a godfather in the garden and a sparrow named Gerald who took geopolitical interest in his welfare. Yeah, he said, we are. In Azkaban, the cell where Sirius Black had spent 4 years and 1 month was empty. The North Sea battered the rocks beneath it, indifferent as it had always been, as it would be long after everything else had changed. The Dementors circled above, and below them the cell was cold and gray and vacant, and the world had moved on without waiting for their permission. In the Black family registry at Grimmauld Place, the entry that had appeared in silver-black ink 8 months ago still burned with the quiet, steady light of magic that had been sealed properly, magic that knew what it was and didn't require maintenance. Harry James Potter, kinbound to Nymphadora Andromeda Tonks. Secondary Guardian Sirius Orion Black. Below it, in the space that had been blank since the last entry in 1871, a new line had appeared in the weeks since the Wisengamot Review. Not official, not registered, not invoked through ritual, just there, the way the house had put up the shelf in Sirius's room, the way the stairs made new sounds for new people. The House of Black's magic writing its own records. The house stands with Harry James Potter. The house stands with Nymphadora Tonks. The house stands with what they are building. The house stands. Below, the sitting room in Oxford, where the fire still burned and the tea was still warm, and Gerald was asleep on the windowsill with the composed dignity of a bird who's decided his work here is meaningful. And Sirius was coming in from the garden with the quiet ease of a man relearning his own body in the world. And Ted was putting on music at a volume that meant Saturday evening rather than weekday. And Andromeda was at her desk with the Pettigrew file and the Dumbledore correspondence and the Lucius notes, and all the moving, living architecture of the thing they were building upstairs. Two children on a windowsill were looking at the spring sky, not afraid of what was coming, ready for it. Not because they'd been told to be, not because a prophecy said so, not because ancient magic had decided it, because they had each other. Because they'd had each other since a climbing frame in Surrey, since a chocolate frog and a pair of mismatched socks and a 5-year-old girl who had looked at a hollow-eyed boy and said, "That's not right." Because the House of Black in all its centuries of darkness had finally gotten something completely, irreversibly, magnificently right. And it had taken a 5-year-old with traffic cone hair and the absolute certainty of someone who has never learned to be small. That was enough. That had always been enough. The sky over Oxford held the last of the light and Gerald slept, and the house was warm and Harry Potter had people.